Extraction 2, 2023, represents a major expansion of the Extraction franchise, transforming what began as a gritty rescue thriller into a larger and more emotionally layered action universe. Directed by Sam Hargrave and written by Joe Russo, the film builds upon the brutal intensity of the first movie while widening its scope in terms of character development, emotional storytelling, international settings, and cinematic ambition. Adapted from the graphic novel Syud, the sequel continues the story of Tyler Rake, portrayed by Chris Hemsworth, while introducing new themes involving family trauma, redemption, sacrifice, and moral responsibility. The film not only delivers large-scale action sequences but also deepens the mythology and emotional stakes surrounding its protagonist. One of the most important aspects of Extraction 2 is the creative partnership behind it. Sam Hargrave, a former stunt coordinator and action designer, returns as director after proving his ability to create realistic and immersive combat sequences in the first film. His approach to filmmaking emphasizes practical stunts, long takes, physical choreography, and visceral realism. Unlike many modern action films that rely heavily on quick editing and excessive CGI, Hargrave prefers to place viewers directly inside the action. This stylistic choice gives the Extraction franchise a distinctive identity. The audience does not simply observe the fights and chases from a distance, they feel as though they are trapped inside the chaos alongside Tyler Rake. Joe Russo's screenplay adds emotional depth to this technical brilliance. Rather than creating a simple, mission-based action sequel, Russo expands Tyler's personal journey. In the first film, Tyler Rake was introduced as a broken mercenary haunted by the death of his son and emotionally disconnected from the world around him. Extraction 2 continues that trauma but pushes the character towards self-discovery and redemption. Tyler begins the film physically wounded and emotionally exhausted after surviving the near-fatal events of the original movie. He is not portrayed as an invincible superhero. Instead, he appears vulnerable, scarred, and uncertain about his future. The opening sections of the film establish this vulnerability effectively. Tyler is recovering in a remote cabin, hidden away from the violence that defined his life. The snowy isolation symbolizes both healing and emotional emptiness. He has survived death, but survival alone has not given his life meaning. This quieter beginning is essential because it contrasts sharply with the explosive action that follows. It also humanizes Tyler, reminding audiences that beneath the brutal mercenary exterior lies a man struggling with grief and guilt. The central mission of the film involves rescuing the imprisoned family of a dangerous Georgian crime lord. At first glance, the setup resembles a traditional extraction operation. However, the emotional complexity underneath the mission elevates it beyond standard action storytelling. The woman Tyler must rescue is connected to his ex-wife, which creates a personal connection absent from many action films. This changes Tyler's motivation. He is no longer fighting merely for money or professional obligation. Instead, he sees an opportunity to do something meaningful for someone he once loved. This emotional angle is critical to understanding the film's deeper themes. Tyler's mission becomes symbolic of redemption. Throughout the story, he repeatedly risks his life not only to save others but also to confront the emotional failures of his own past. The rescue operation forces him to become emotionally involved with the family, especially the children, which reminds him of the son he lost. Every protective act Tyler performs carries emotional weight because it reflects his attempt to heal wounds that have never fully closed. Chris Hemsworth delivers one of the strongest performances of his career in this role. While he is globally recognized for playing larger-than-life heroes such as Thor, Tyler Rake allows Hemsworth to explore a darker and more grounded character. His performance balances physical intimidation with emotional restraint. Much of Tyler's pain is communicated through silence, facial expressions, and body language rather than dialogue. Hemsworth portrays a man carrying immense psychological burdens while still functioning as a lethal operative. The supporting cast also contributes significantly to the film's emotional and dramatic power. Golshifteh Farahani returns as Nick Khan, Tyler's trusted ally. Nick is not treated as a secondary side character but as a capable and intelligent operator with her own authority and emotional depth. Her dynamic with Tyler adds balance to the story because she challenges him while remaining loyal to him. Their partnership reflects mutual respect rather than simplistic hero worship. Adam Besser's return as Yaz also strengthens the team dynamic. The chemistry between Tyler, Nick, and Yaz creates a believable sense of camaraderie. They function less like mercenaries and more like survivors bound together by dangerous experiences. This human connection helps the film avoid becoming emotionally cold despite its relentless violence. The villains in Extraction 2 also play a crucial role in raising the stakes. The Georgian crime syndicate is portrayed as ruthless, powerful, and deeply personal in its pursuit of revenge. Unlike generic antagonists, these villains are tied directly to the emotional consequences of Tyler's mission. Once the extraction occurs, the story transforms into a brutal cycle of retaliation. The enemy's anger is not simply professional, it becomes intensely personal. This gives the film a sense of inevitability and escalating danger. One of the defining features of Extraction 2 is its ambitious action choreography. Sam Hargrave pushes the boundaries of modern action filmmaking through extended sequences designed to appear as continuous shots. The most famous example is the massive prison escape sequence. This sequence is extraordinary because of its scale, complexity, and technical execution. The action moves across multiple environments, including prison cells, rooftops, vehicles, trains, and streets, all while maintaining fluid camera movement. The prison riot sequence is particularly significant because it demonstrates Hargrave's philosophy of immersive action. Rather than relying on disorienting cuts, the camera follows Tyler directly through the chaos. Viewers witness every punch, gunshot, explosion, and tactical decision in real time. The choreography combines hand-to-hand combat, firearms, environmental destruction, and vehicle action seamlessly. What makes this sequence especially impressive is the physical realism. Tyler is not depicted as effortlessly invincible. He suffers injuries, becomes exhausted, and struggles against overwhelming odds. This vulnerability increases tension because the audience senses genuine danger. Every confrontation feels earned rather than artificially exaggerated. The train sequence later in the film further showcases Hargrave's technical ambition. Action unfolds in confined spaces filled with fire, collapsing structures, and moving vehicles. The use of practical effects and coordinated stunt work creates a visceral intensity rarely seen in contemporary action cinema. The audience experiences the sensation of momentum and chaos in a way that CGI-heavy films often fail to achieve. The cinematography throughout the film reinforces this immersive style. The camera frequently stays close to Tyler, creating intimacy during combat. Instead of emphasizing spectacle alone, the visuals emphasize survival. Smoke, blood, debris, and confined environments make the action feel dirty and dangerous. This grounded visual approach distinguishes Extraction 2 from more stylized or fantastical action franchises. Another key component of the film is its exploration of family relationships. Beneath the explosions and gunfights lies a story about damaged families, emotional neglect, and cycles of violence. Tyler's emotional connection to the children he rescues reflects his unresolved grief over losing his own son. The children themselves are trapped between fear, loyalty, and manipulation due to their upbringing within a criminal environment. The teenage boy in particular becomes central to the emotional narrative. He struggles with conflicting feelings about Tyler and his imprisoned father. This internal conflict adds moral complexity to the story because the boy is not simply a helpless victim. He has been psychologically shaped by violence and criminal influence. Tyler attempts to protect him physically, but the deeper challenge involves breaking the emotional hold of the criminal world. This focus on generational trauma elevates the film beyond straightforward action entertainment. Violence in Extraction 2 is not presented merely as spectacle. It is shown as a destructive force that shapes identities, relationships, and emotional development. Tyler recognizes this because he himself has been emotionally destroyed by loss and warfare. Idris Elba's appearance introduces another intriguing layer to the franchise. His mysterious character hints at a larger network operating behind the scenes. This is important because it signals the expansion of the Extraction universe into something broader than standalone rescue missions. Joe and Anthony Russo expressed interest in building a cinematic universe around these characters, and Elba's role clearly serves as a bridge toward future stories. The possibility of a larger universe creates exciting narrative opportunities. The world of Extraction already contains international criminal organizations, covert operations, black market intelligence networks, and morally ambiguous mercenaries. Expanding this world could allow future films to explore different operatives, geopolitical conflicts, and interconnected missions. However, Extraction 2 wisely keeps Tyler Rake emotionally central rather than losing focus in franchise building. The film's production history also reveals the challenges behind its creation. Following the success of the first movie on Netflix, a sequel was quickly announced in May 2020. The original film had become one of Netflix's most successful action releases, largely due to its combination of intense action and Chris Hemsworth's star power. The streaming success demonstrated that audiences strongly responded to grounded, hard-hitting action thrillers. However, the sequel's development occurred during the global COVID-19 pandemic, which significantly disrupted film productions worldwide. Filming was initially planned for Sydney in September 2021 but faced delays due to pandemic restrictions. Eventually, production began in Prague in November 2021 before concluding in Vienna in April 2022. These European locations contribute heavily to the film's atmosphere. Prague's architecture and urban environments provide a gritty realism suitable for the film's darker tone. Vienna adds elegance and scale to later sections of the story. The cold weather settings, industrial environments, and harsh landscapes reinforce the emotional bleakness surrounding Tyler Rake's journey. The production design throughout the film deserves recognition as well. Prisons, safe houses, train stations, and urban battle zones are crafted with strong attention to realism and detail. The environments are not merely backgrounds for action scenes, they actively shape the choreography and narrative tension. Narrow hallways, crowded cells, moving trains, and collapsing structures create constant physical obstacles. The score composed by Henry Jackman and Alex Belcher further enhances the emotional and cinematic experience. Their music combines electronic intensity with emotional undertones, supporting both the action and quieter character moments. During combat sequences, the music amplifies urgency and momentum. In emotional scenes, it becomes more restrained and melancholic, reflecting Tyler's internal pain. One of the reasons Extraction 2 succeeds is its understanding of pacing. The film alternates between explosive action and reflective emotional scenes. This rhythm prevents exhaustion and allows the audience to reconnect with the characters emotionally. Quiet conversations and moments of vulnerability become just as important as firefights and explosions. Sam Hargrave's background as a stunt coordinator significantly influences this pacing. He understands that action scenes become more effective when audiences care about the characters involved. As a result, the violence never feels empty. Every major fight sequence carries emotional consequences tied to Tyler's mission and relationships. Thematically, Extraction 2 explores survival, redemption, and sacrifice. Tyler repeatedly places himself in danger because he believes saving others may give meaning to his own suffering. Yet the film avoids simplistic redemption cliches. Tyler cannot erase his past trauma or undo his mistakes. Instead, redemption is portrayed as an ongoing struggle requiring difficult choices and personal sacrifice. The movie also examines isolation. Tyler often appears emotionally disconnected from the world around him. His profession as a mercenary has forced him into constant violence and emotional suppression. However, through protecting the family, he slowly reconnects with empathy and responsibility. This emotional evolution gives the film a stronger dramatic foundation than many action sequels. Another interesting aspect is the film's depiction of masculinity. Tyler is physically powerful and highly skilled, but the story emphasizes emotional vulnerability rather than stoic invincibility. His grief, guilt, and emotional wounds are central to the narrative. This creates a more nuanced portrayal of an action hero. Strength in Extraction 2 is not merely about combat ability, it also involves emotional endurance and the willingness to protect others despite personal pain. The film's ending leaves the future open while providing emotional closure. Tyler survives another near-impossible mission, but the psychological scars remain. His experiences have changed him, and the possibility of future operations suggests that his journey is far from over. At the same time, the conclusion reinforces the idea that Tyler's greatest battles are internal rather than physical. In many ways, Extraction 2 represents the evolution of modern action cinema. It combines old-school practical stunt work with contemporary filmmaking techniques and emotional storytelling. The film respects the audience's desire for spectacular action while also investing in character depth and thematic resonance. The success of the movie demonstrates that audiences still appreciate grounded, physically demanding action films led by charismatic performers. Chris Hemsworth's dedication to the role, Sam Hargrave's innovative direction, and Joe Russo's emotionally focused screenplay collectively elevate Extraction 2 beyond typical streaming entertainment. Ultimately, Extraction 2 is not just about gunfights, explosions, or rescue missions. It is a story about broken people searching for purpose in a violent world. Tyler Rake's journey reflects themes of grief, redemption, and human connection hidden beneath layers of brutal action. The film succeeds because it never forgets that emotional stakes matter just as much as physical danger. By expanding its characters, improving its emotional storytelling, and delivering some of the most ambitious action sequences in recent years, Extraction 2 establishes itself as a standout modern action thriller and a major step forward for the franchise. The release and reception of Extraction 2 in 2023 marked an important moment not only for Netflix as a streaming platform but also for the modern action thriller genre as a whole. When the film premiered on Netflix on June 16, 2023, audiences and critics immediately recognized that it was more than a routine sequel. Directed by Sam Hargrave and starring Chris Hemsworth as Tyler Rake, the movie arrived with enormous expectations following the success of the original Extraction film. However, instead of simply repeating the formula of the first movie, Extraction 2 expanded its emotional storytelling, intensified its action choreography, and strengthened the cinematic identity of the franchise. The positive reviews received by the film reflected how effectively it balanced emotional depth with large-scale action entertainment. Critics praised its ambitious stunt work, grounded realism, emotional character development, and technical filmmaking achievements. The movie's nomination for Best Stunts, Action, at the 6th Hollywood Critics Association Mid-Season Film Awards further confirmed that the film was recognized as one of the most technically impressive action productions of the year. To fully understand the importance of this release and its critical response, it is necessary to examine the film's cultural context, audience expectations, action design, performances, cinematic craftsmanship, and the broader impact it had on streaming-era filmmaking. When Extraction 2 was released on Netflix in June 2023, streaming platforms were competing intensely for audience attention. The entertainment industry had changed dramatically in recent years. Streaming services were no longer viewed merely as alternatives to traditional cinema. Instead, they had become dominant forces capable of producing large-scale blockbuster films featuring major Hollywood stars, massive budgets, and global marketing campaigns. Netflix, in particular, had invested heavily in action cinema because action films possess universal appeal across international audiences. Unlike dialogue-heavy dramas or culturally specific comedies, action movies often transcend language barriers through visual storytelling, physical performance, and spectacle. The success of the first Extraction movie demonstrated this clearly. The original film became one of Netflix's biggest hits because viewers worldwide connected with its brutal combat scenes, emotional intensity, and fast-paced narrative. As a result, anticipation for Extraction 2 became extremely high long before its release. Audiences expected the sequel to deliver even bigger action sequences and continue Tyler Rake's story in a meaningful way. Sequels often struggle because they either repeat the same formula without innovation or become overly complicated in an attempt to appear larger than the original. Extraction 2 succeeded because it found the right balance between familiarity and expansion. The release date of June 16, 2023 was strategically important. Summer has traditionally been associated with blockbuster entertainment, and Netflix positioned the movie as a major global event. Although it premiered on a streaming platform rather than in theaters, the marketing campaign treated the film like a major cinematic release. Trailers highlighted the film's intense prison riot sequence, explosive train battles, and Chris Hemsworth's physically demanding performance. One of the key reasons critics responded positively to Extraction 2 was the film's dedication to practical action filmmaking. In an era where many blockbuster films rely heavily on computer-generated imagery and rapid editing, Extraction 2 embraced physical stunt work, immersive camera movement, and realistic combat choreography. This approach gave the film authenticity and visceral energy. Sam Hargrave's direction played a crucial role in shaping this response. Before becoming a director, Hargrave worked extensively as a stunt coordinator and second unit director on major action films. His background gave him a deep understanding of physical movement, choreography, and stunt performance. Rather than treating action as separate from storytelling, Hargrave integrated combat directly into character development and emotional tension. Critics particularly praised the famous extended, one-shot action sequence in the film. This sequence, which unfolds across a prison riot, a car chase, and a moving train battle, became one of the defining cinematic achievements of the movie. The scene created the illusion of continuous action without interruption, immersing viewers directly into Tyler Rake's dangerous mission. The technical complexity behind this sequence impressed critics because it required extraordinary coordination between actors, stunt performers, camera operators, special effects teams, and editors. Every movement had to be carefully timed. Explosions, hand-to-hand combat, gunfire, vehicle movement, and environmental destruction all had to function together seamlessly. More importantly, the sequence was not praised solely for technical reasons. Critics admired how the action maintained emotional intensity throughout. Tyler Rake's exhaustion, desperation, and determination remained central to the scene. The audience was not simply watching spectacle for its own sake. They were emotionally invested in Tyler's survival and the fate of the family he was trying to rescue. This emotional engagement distinguished Extraction 2 from many modern action films. Some action movies become so focused on visual excess that viewers stop caring about the characters. Extraction 2 avoided this problem by grounding its action in Tyler's emotional journey. Critics recognized that the film combined physical intensity with genuine human stakes. Chris Hemsworth's performance also received significant praise from reviewers. Although Hemsworth is widely known for portraying the superhero Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, critics noted that Tyler Rake allowed him to explore a more vulnerable and emotionally layered character. Unlike the humorous and godlike persona of Thor, Tyler Rake is deeply damaged, haunted by grief, and emotionally isolated. Hemsworth's physical commitment to the role impressed audiences and critics alike. The action scenes required intense stunt work, physical endurance, and believable combat performance. Hemsworth trained extensively for the role, and this preparation became visible in the film's brutal realism. Every fight felt exhausting and dangerous rather than artificially choreographed. However, critics also appreciated Hemsworth's quieter dramatic moments. Tyler's emotional pain, survivor's guilt, and internal loneliness gave the character depth beyond that of a typical action hero. The film explored themes of redemption and emotional healing, and Hemsworth's restrained performance made these themes believable. Golshifteh Farahani's performance as Nick Khan also contributed to the film's positive reception. Critics praised her portrayal of a competent and intelligent ally rather than a stereotypical supporting character. Nick's relationship with Tyler added emotional balance and strategic complexity to the story. Their partnership reflected trust and mutual respect rather than simplistic action movie cliches. The positive reviews for Extraction 2 were also connected to the film's pacing and structure. Many action sequels struggle because they become overloaded with endless explosions and repetitive combat scenes. Extraction 2 succeeded because it alternated between moments of explosive violence and quieter emotional scenes. This balance allowed viewers to recover emotionally between major action sequences while deepening their connection to the characters. Conversations about grief, family, loyalty, and responsibility added emotional texture to the film. Critics appreciated that the story took time to develop relationships rather than rushing endlessly from one action scene to another. The emotional themes of the film resonated strongly with audiences as well. Beneath its intense violence and tactical combat, Extraction 2 is fundamentally a story about broken people seeking redemption. Tyler Rake is not portrayed as a flawless hero. He is emotionally scarred by the death of his son and burdened by guilt over his past failures. The rescue mission at the center of the story forces Tyler to reconnect with emotions he has spent years suppressing. Protecting the imprisoned family, especially the children, becomes symbolic of his attempt to heal emotionally and rediscover purpose. Critics responded positively to this emotional dimension because it elevated the movie beyond straightforward action entertainment. Another important factor behind the film's positive reception was its grounded tone. Unlike many modern blockbusters that rely on exaggerated humor or fantasy elements, Extraction 2 embraced realism and seriousness. Violence in the film felt painful and dangerous. Characters suffered injuries, experienced trauma, and faced moral consequences. This grounded style appealed to viewers seeking action cinema that felt intense and believable rather than cartoonish. Critics often compared the film favorably to classic action thrillers that prioritized physical realism and practical effects. The movie's gritty visual style, cold color palette, and realistic combat choreography reinforced this atmosphere. The film's international setting also contributed to its cinematic appeal. The story moves across prisons, urban battle zones, safe houses, and snowy landscapes in Eastern Europe. These environments created a harsh and dangerous atmosphere that matched Tyler Rake's emotional state. Production design and cinematography received praise for creating immersive environments filled with tension and realism. The prison sequences, in particular, stood out because of their claustrophobic intensity. Narrow hallways, crowded cells, and chaotic riots created a constant sense of danger. Critics admired how the film used physical spaces creatively during combat sequences. The score composed by Henry Jackman and Alex Belcher further enhanced the movie's emotional and cinematic power. The music blended electronic intensity with darker emotional undertones. During action scenes, the score amplified urgency and momentum. During quieter moments, it reflected Tyler's emotional isolation and internal suffering. Critics also recognized the importance of Sam Hargrave's directing style in shaping the identity of the Extraction franchise. Hargrave approached action filmmaking with clarity and precision. Unlike directors who rely on shaky cameras and rapid cuts to create artificial excitement, Hargrave emphasized spatial awareness and continuity. Viewers could clearly understand where characters were positioned during fights, how environments influenced movement, and how danger evolved within each sequence. This clarity made the action more engaging because audiences could follow every tactical decision and physical movement. The nomination for Best Stunts, Action, at the 6th Hollywood Critics Association Mid-Season Film Awards became one of the clearest acknowledgments of the film's technical excellence. Stunt work is often overlooked during major award seasons despite being one of the most physically demanding and creatively complex aspects of filmmaking. The nomination recognized not only the danger and scale of the stunts but also their storytelling function. The action in Extraction 2 was not random chaos. Every major sequence was carefully designed to reflect Tyler's emotional state, the escalating stakes of the mission, and the brutal realism of the film's world. The stunt teams performed highly dangerous choreography involving fire, vehicle crashes, hand-to-hand combat, rooftop fights, explosions, and moving trains. Coordinating these elements safely while maintaining cinematic realism required extraordinary skill and preparation. The prison riot sequence alone demonstrated why the film earned critical recognition for its stunt work. The scene involved hundreds of performers, multiple camera transitions, practical explosions, and physically exhausting choreography. The illusion of a continuous shot intensified the difficulty because mistakes could force large portions of the sequence to be restarted. Critics often described the action as immersive rather than merely spectacular. This distinction is important because it reflects how deeply viewers became emotionally engaged with the scenes. Instead of passively observing destruction, audiences felt trapped inside the chaos alongside Tyler Rake. The positive reception of Extraction 2 also reflected changing attitudes toward streaming films. In earlier years, some critics and audiences viewed streaming releases as less prestigious than theatrical films. However, movies like Extraction 2 challenged this perception by delivering cinematic scale, technical sophistication, and strong performances comparable to major theatrical releases. Netflix demonstrated through this film that streaming platforms could produce action cinema with global appeal and high production values. The success of Extraction 2 reinforced the idea that audiences were willing to embrace streaming releases as major entertainment events. Another reason the film resonated with critics was its refusal to become overly comedic or self-aware. Many modern action franchises rely heavily on humor and irony. While humor can be effective, excessive jokes sometimes weaken emotional stakes and dramatic tension. Extraction 2 maintained a serious tone that respected the emotional pain experienced by its characters. This seriousness gave weight to Tyler's journey. His suffering, trauma, and sacrifices felt meaningful because the film treated them sincerely rather than using them as setup for jokes. Critics appreciated this emotional maturity and tonal consistency. The film's ending also contributed to positive discussion surrounding the movie. Rather than offering simplistic closure, the conclusion suggested ongoing emotional struggles and future possibilities. Tyler survives physically, but the psychological scars remain. This complexity gave the story emotional resonance beyond its action spectacle. The appearance of Idris Elba's mysterious character hinted at the expansion of the Extraction universe, generating excitement about future installments. Critics noted that the film successfully expanded its world-building without losing focus on Tyler Rake's personal journey. Audience reactions mirrored much of the critical praise. Fans of the first film appreciated the sequel's larger scale and emotional depth, while new viewers were drawn in by the intense action sequences and strong performances. Social media discussions frequently focused on the prison sequence, with many viewers calling it one of the best action scenes in recent years. The film's success also strengthened Chris Hemsworth's reputation as a leading action star outside the superhero genre. While his role as Thor made him globally famous, Extraction 2 demonstrated his ability to carry grounded and emotionally intense action films. His physical commitment, charisma, and dramatic performance became central reasons for the movie's popularity. From a broader cinematic perspective, Extraction 2 represented the continued evolution of modern action filmmaking. The movie combined practical stunt traditions associated with classic action cinema with modern camera technology and streaming-era production values. It showed that audiences still value realistic physical action and emotionally driven storytelling. The positive reviews confirmed that viewers and critics alike were searching for action films that felt authentic, immersive, and emotionally engaging. Extraction 2 succeeded because it understood that spectacular violence alone is not enough. The audience must care about the people involved and feel emotionally connected to their struggles. Ultimately, the release of Extraction 2 on Netflix in June 2023 became a major achievement for the franchise, for Sam Hargrave as a director, and for modern action cinema in general. The film's positive reviews reflected widespread admiration for its technical ambition, emotional storytelling, grounded performances, and extraordinary stunt choreography. Its nomination for Best Stunts, Action, further validated the immense creative effort behind its action design. More importantly, the film proved that streaming-era blockbusters could achieve cinematic excellence while reaching global audiences simultaneously. Extraction 2 emerged not merely as a successful sequel but as a defining example of how modern action thrillers can combine emotional depth, practical filmmaking, and large-scale spectacle into a compelling cinematic experience. The opening storyline of Extraction 2, 2023, is one of the most important parts of the film because it establishes the emotional stakes, the psychological condition of Tyler Rake, and the dangerous mission that drives the entire narrative forward. While the movie is widely recognized for its intense action and large-scale combat sequences, the foundation of the story is deeply emotional and character-driven. The beginning of the film carefully explores trauma, guilt, broken relationships, abuse, family loyalty, and the search for redemption. Every major event introduced in this section becomes crucial to understanding Tyler Rake's emotional journey throughout the film. The story begins shortly after the devastating events of the first Extraction movie. Tyler Rake has barely survived the mission in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where he rescued Ovi Mahajan from heavily armed enemies in a brutal urban war zone. In the original film, Tyler suffered severe gunshot wounds and appeared to sacrifice himself to ensure the boy's escape. His survival in Extraction 2 immediately establishes that Tyler is a man who has endured immense physical and emotional suffering. The opening scenes show Tyler being airlifted for emergency medical treatment to Dubai. This detail is important because it demonstrates the seriousness of his injuries and the near-fatal nature of his previous mission. Tyler is not portrayed as an invincible action hero who walks away from violence without consequences. His body is broken, exhausted, and scarred. The film emphasizes the physical damage he has endured through long recovery scenes that focus on pain, weakness, and rehabilitation. These recovery scenes are more than simple plot transitions. They symbolize Tyler's psychological condition. He has survived physically, but emotionally he remains deeply damaged. The near-death experience forces him into a period of isolation and reflection. Unlike traditional action heroes who immediately seek another mission, Tyler retreats from the world entirely. After recovering from his injuries, Tyler retires from mercenary work and relocates to a remote cabin in Gmunden, Austria. This setting is extremely significant from both a visual and thematic perspective. Gmunden is cold, isolated, and quiet, surrounded by snow-covered landscapes and stillness. The environment reflects Tyler's emotional emptiness. He is disconnected from society, from relationships, and from any clear purpose in life. The cabin represents more than physical recovery. It acts as a form of emotional exile. Tyler chooses isolation because he no longer knows how to live a normal life. Violence has defined his existence for years, and the trauma of losing his son continues to haunt him. Even though he survived the mission in Dhaka, he has not healed emotionally. In many ways, Tyler feels like a ghost, a man who survived death physically but remained spiritually lost. The film carefully uses silence and atmosphere during these early scenes. Tyler spends much of his time alone, exercising, recovering, and existing in emotional numbness. These quieter moments are crucial because they humanize him. Beneath his reputation as a deadly mercenary is a man suffering from grief, regret, and emotional exhaustion. One of the central themes introduced here is purposelessness. Tyler no longer has a mission, but he also lacks a meaningful personal life. He is trapped between survival and emptiness. This emotional state makes him vulnerable to the mission that eventually arrives. The turning point occurs when Tyler is approached by a mysterious stranger. This character's arrival shifts the story dramatically. The stranger offers Tyler a mission connected to his past, specifically involving his ex-wife Mia's family. This is a major difference from the first film because the mission is no longer just professional. It becomes deeply personal. The stranger asks Tyler to rescue Ketevan, Mia's sister, along with her 2 children, Sandro and Nina. Immediately, the story gains emotional complexity because Tyler's connection to Mia remains emotionally unresolved. Tyler and Mia's marriage collapsed largely due to the death of their son. Tyler's inability to emotionally process that tragedy destroyed their relationship. Therefore, helping Mia's family becomes symbolic of Tyler's desire to make amends for past failures. The mission also introduces themes of domestic abuse, toxic power, and psychological imprisonment. Ketevan is trapped in a horrifying situation because of her marriage to David Radiani, one of the leaders of Georgia's most dangerous criminal syndicate, Nagazi. The film presents David not simply as a criminal but as a deeply controlling and abusive figure. David co-founded the Nagazi syndicate with his brother Zurab. Their organization represents organized violence, corruption, and criminal power. However, the film does not limit David's cruelty to his criminal activities. His abuse extends directly into his family life, making him a terrifying presence both publicly and privately. The detail about David killing a DEA agent is important because it explains why he is imprisoned and unable to escape through corruption. Usually, powerful crime lords can manipulate legal systems through bribery and political influence. However, killing an American DEA agent brings intense international pressure. This creates a rare situation where David cannot buy his freedom. As a result, David is forced to remain inside prison. However, even imprisonment does not weaken his control over his family. Instead, he forces Ketevan and the children to live inside the prison with him. This is one of the darkest and most disturbing aspects of the story because it transforms the prison into both a literal and symbolic cage for the family. The prison environment represents emotional suffocation and abuse. Ketevan and her children are stripped of normal life, safety, and freedom. The poor living conditions expose the children to violence, fear, and psychological trauma. David's abusive behavior creates constant emotional tension within the family. The film uses this setup to explore cycles of violence and toxic masculinity. David controls his family through intimidation, fear, and emotional manipulation. He believes ownership and dominance define family relationships. This toxic worldview mirrors the brutality of the criminal empire he helped build. Ketevan's decision to call Mia for help is emotionally significant because it represents desperation and courage. She realizes that remaining with David will destroy both her life and the emotional well-being of her children. Her request for help becomes an act of survival. This moment also reconnects Tyler to Mia emotionally, even though they remain separated. Mia's involvement forces Tyler to confront painful memories from his past. He understands the emotional consequences of damaged families because he experienced the destruction of his own marriage after losing his son. Tyler's decision to accept the mission reveals important aspects of his character. On the surface, he appears reluctant and emotionally detached. However, beneath that exterior lies a deep desire for redemption. Saving Ketevan and her children becomes an opportunity to protect a family in ways he could not protect his own. This emotional motivation separates Extraction 2 from many generic action films. Tyler is not motivated by money, fame, or professional duty. His involvement is deeply personal and psychological. He sees the mission as a chance to do something meaningful with his life after surviving death. The children, Sandro and Nina, also become emotionally important to Tyler. Their vulnerability reminds him of his deceased son. This creates emotional tension because Tyler struggles between maintaining emotional distance and developing protective instincts toward the children. Sandro's character is especially important because he reflects the emotional damage caused by growing up around violence and criminal influence. He is torn between fear of his father and emotional loyalty to him. Children raised in abusive environments often experience conflicting emotions toward abusive parents, and the film explores this complexity effectively. Sandro does not immediately trust Tyler because Tyler represents an outsider attempting to separate him from his father. This emotional conflict becomes central to the story later in the film. Tyler's mission is not simply physical extraction, it also involves navigating emotional trauma and psychological conditioning. The introduction of Nick and Yaz further strengthens the story's emotional and tactical foundation. Tyler recruits Nick Khan and her brother Yaz to help with the mission. Their return creates continuity with the first film and reinforces the sense of loyalty between the characters. Nick is portrayed as highly capable, intelligent, and emotionally resilient. She is not merely Tyler's assistant but a trusted partner who understands the dangers of the mission. Her relationship with Tyler is built on mutual respect and shared survival experiences. Yaz adds energy and humanity to the team dynamic. Together, Tyler, Nick, and Yaz operate like a small family formed through danger and trust. This dynamic contrasts sharply with the toxic family environment created by David. The film intentionally compares these two forms of relationships, one based on loyalty and protection, the other based on fear and control. The planning stages of the mission also contribute significantly to the film's tension. Extracting a family from a prison controlled by one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations is an almost impossible task. The prison itself functions as a fortress filled with armed guards, gang influence, and violent criminals. This setup creates immediate suspense because the audience understands the enormous risks involved. Tyler is not infiltrating a simple building, he is entering a hostile environment controlled by powerful enemies with extensive resources. The emotional stakes further increase because failure would not simply mean death. It would mean condemning Kitevan and her children to continued abuse and psychological imprisonment. Tyler understands this, which makes the mission feel morally urgent rather than professionally routine. Another important aspect of this opening storyline is how it establishes the film's themes of redemption and second chances. Tyler survived death physically, but emotionally he still feels trapped by guilt and grief. The mission offers him an opportunity to reconnect with humanity through protecting others. However, the film avoids portraying redemption as simple or guaranteed. Tyler remains emotionally damaged and uncertain. He carries immense psychological baggage from his past. His interactions with Mia's family force him to confront emotional wounds he has spent years avoiding. The prison itself also functions symbolically within the story. It represents more than incarceration. It reflects emotional captivity, toxic relationships, and generational trauma. Kitevan and her children are physically imprisoned, but Tyler is emotionally imprisoned by guilt and grief. This thematic parallel strengthens the story considerably. Tyler's mission becomes both external and internal. He must rescue the family physically while also confronting his own emotional isolation. The screenplay carefully balances exposition with emotional development during these early scenes. Instead of overwhelming the audience with endless action immediately, the film takes time to establish motivations, relationships, and emotional stakes. This slower beginning makes the later action sequences far more impactful because viewers understand what is emotionally at risk. The atmosphere throughout these opening scenes is deliberately cold and tense. Snowy landscapes, dim prison interiors, and isolated environments reinforce the themes of loneliness and emotional despair. The cinematography emphasizes stillness and silence before the explosive violence begins later in the film. Chris Hemsworth's performance during these scenes is especially important because much of Tyler's emotional state is communicated non-verbally. His physical exhaustion, guarded expressions, and restrained behavior reveal a man struggling internally. Hemsworth portrays Tyler not as a fearless superhero but as someone carrying years of emotional pain. The film also introduces moral ambiguity early in the story. Tyler is a mercenary capable of extreme violence, yet he is also compassionate and protective. David, meanwhile, loves his family in his own distorted way while simultaneously abusing and controlling them. These complexities prevent the story from becoming emotionally simplistic. As the mission preparation progresses, the audience senses that Tyler is being pulled back into the violent world he attempted to leave behind. This creates dramatic irony because viewers understand that retirement was never truly possible for him. Violence has shaped his identity for too long. At the same time, the mission offers Tyler something he has lacked for years: purpose. Protecting Kitevan and the children gives his survival meaning. Without this mission, Tyler would likely remain emotionally lost in isolation. The opening storyline ultimately succeeds because it transforms what could have been a standard rescue setup into a deeply emotional narrative about trauma, family, redemption, and survival. Every major character introduced during this section carries emotional scars and personal conflicts that influence the rest of the film. By carefully establishing Tyler's emotional condition, the abusive environment surrounding Kitevan's family, and the impossible danger of the mission, Extraction 2 creates a powerful dramatic foundation for the intense action sequences that follow. The result is an opening act that combines emotional storytelling with suspenseful setup, ensuring that the audience becomes invested not only in the action itself but also in the emotional lives of the characters fighting to survive. The prison extraction sequence and its aftermath in Extraction 2, 2023, form the emotional and cinematic centerpiece of the entire film. This section of the story is not merely an extended action set piece, it is a carefully constructed narrative explosion where themes of violence, loyalty, family, trauma, redemption, and psychological manipulation collide with brutal intensity. Every event during this sequence pushes the characters into deeper emotional conflict while simultaneously raising the physical stakes to extraordinary levels. The sequence begins when Tyler Rake, Nick Khan, and Yaz infiltrate the Georgian prison with the help of a bribed guard. On the surface, the plan appears straightforward: enter the prison quietly, locate Kitevan and her children, and escape before the criminal organization can react. However, the prison itself is designed almost like a war zone waiting to erupt. It is overcrowded, tense, and dominated by criminal influence. Violence simmers beneath every hallway and cell block, creating an atmosphere where chaos feels inevitable. The bribed guard represents one of the film's recurring ideas about corruption and survival within systems controlled by fear and power. The prison is officially a government institution, yet criminal influence has infected every level of it. Guards can be bought, inmates control territories, and loyalty is dictated by intimidation rather than morality. This corruption reflects the larger reach of the Nagazi syndicate, showing that Davit and Zurab's influence extends far beyond the criminal underworld. Tyler and his team enter the prison fully aware that if anything goes wrong, escape will become nearly impossible. Unlike many action heroes who walk into danger confidently and without hesitation, Tyler understands the reality of the situation. The prison is filled with armed enemies, narrow corridors, locked gates, and violent inmates. One mistake could trap everyone inside permanently. This tension is crucial because it gives the action emotional and psychological weight. The audience senses the danger long before the violence begins. Every hallway feels claustrophobic, every glance from prisoners feels threatening, and every second increases the possibility of exposure. The prison environment itself functions symbolically. It represents more than physical confinement. It reflects emotional imprisonment and cycles of violence that trap entire families and generations. Kitevan and her children are not criminals, yet they are imprisoned because of Davit's control over their lives. Tyler, meanwhile, is emotionally imprisoned by guilt and trauma from his past. The extraction mission therefore becomes both literal and symbolic, an attempt to free people from destructive systems of control. Once Tyler reaches Kitevan and her children, the emotional tension intensifies. The family is terrified, exhausted, and psychologically damaged by their time inside the prison. The children especially have been shaped by constant exposure to fear and violence. Tyler immediately shifts into protector mode, placing himself between the family and the dangers surrounding them. However, the mission quickly collapses into chaos when the prisoners become alerted to the extraction. This moment triggers one of the most extraordinary action sequences in modern action cinema. The prison erupts into a riot filled with screaming inmates, collapsing order, gunfire, fires, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. The riot is important not only for its scale but for what it represents thematically. The prison was already unstable beneath the surface, and Tyler's extraction operation becomes the spark that unleashes buried violence. The chaos symbolizes how fragile order truly is in environments built on fear and oppression. Once control breaks, primal survival instincts take over. Sam Hargrave's direction during this sequence is especially remarkable because of the immersive filmmaking style. The camera follows Tyler through the chaos with relentless intensity, creating the feeling that the audience is trapped inside the riot alongside him, instead of relying heavily on rapid editing. Tyler's combat style during the riot further reinforces his character. He fights with brutal efficiency, but there is no glamour in the violence. He uses whatever tools are available to survive and protect the family. His movements are aggressive, desperate, and practical. Unlike stylized action heroes who seem invincible, Tyler appears constantly vulnerable and under pressure. The emotional stakes increase dramatically when David confronts Tyler and Kitevan during the extraction. This confrontation is one of the most important moments in the film because it transforms the mission from a rescue operation into a deeply personal war. David attacks Tyler with rage and desperation because he sees the extraction not merely as an escape attempt but as a betrayal. His worldview is built around control and ownership. He believes his family belongs to him regardless of the abuse he inflicts upon them. The possibility of losing that control threatens his identity and authority. The fight between Tyler and David is physically brutal but emotionally charged. David is not simply fighting to survive, he is fighting to maintain power over his family. Tyler, on the other hand, is fighting to break that cycle of abuse and protect Kitevan and the children. Kitevan's involvement in the confrontation is also significant because it demonstrates her transition from victimhood toward resistance. For much of her life, she has been trapped under David's control. During this chaotic moment, however, she actively fights alongside Tyler. This symbolizes her refusal to remain powerless any longer. When Tyler ultimately kills David, the moment carries enormous emotional consequences. On one level, it is necessary for survival. David would never stop pursuing or controlling his family. Yet his death also creates new problems that drive the rest of the film's narrative. David's death transforms the conflict into a blood feud. His brother Zurab now views Tyler's actions as a deeply personal insult requiring revenge. The mission ceases to be about rescue alone and becomes a war between Tyler and the Nagazi syndicate. The emotional consequences of David's death are even more complex for Sandro, Kitevan's son. Sandro idolized his father despite the abuse surrounding the family. This detail is psychologically realistic because children raised in abusive environments often develop confused emotional loyalties toward abusive parents. Sandro has grown up surrounded by the Nagazi organization and its cult-like culture of loyalty, power, and violence. To him, his father represents strength, authority, and identity. The syndicate has essentially conditioned him psychologically from childhood. As a result, Tyler killing David creates emotional conflict rather than relief for Sandro. This complexity makes Sandro one of the film's most tragic characters. He is not evil, but he has been shaped by toxic influence and emotional manipulation. His understanding of family loyalty has been distorted by the criminal world around him. After escaping the prison, Tyler and the group board an armored train. This transition keeps the momentum of the sequence intense while changing the physical environment of the action. The train becomes another claustrophobic battlefield filled with danger and movement. The armored train symbolizes temporary safety, but it quickly turns into another war zone as Nagazi forces continue their pursuit. The action aboard the train demonstrates the relentless nature of the syndicate's revenge. Tyler's enemies are not willing to negotiate or retreat. They pursue the group with obsessive determination. The confined space of the train increases tension significantly. Unlike open battlefields, the train offers limited escape routes and constant physical vulnerability. Every compartment becomes a potential death trap. Explosions, gunfire, and close-quarters combat create overwhelming pressure. This sequence also highlights Tyler's role as protector. Throughout the chaos, he constantly places himself between danger and the family. His protective instincts reveal the emotional transformation occurring within him. Earlier in the film, Tyler appeared emotionally detached and isolated. Now he is risking everything for people who depend on him. The visual intensity of the train sequence reflects Tyler's internal struggle. He is fighting not just enemies but also his own guilt and emotional scars. Protecting the family becomes symbolic of protecting the part of himself that still believes redemption is possible. Eventually, Tyler and the others manage to escape to Vienna via plane. At first, this appears to represent a temporary victory. The prison nightmare is over, David is dead, and the family has escaped immediate danger. However, the emotional tension surrounding Sandro remains unresolved. Sandro's psychological conflict continues beneath the surface. Although physically removed from the Nagazi world, emotionally he remains tied to it. This becomes clear when Sandro secretly contacts Zurab and reveals their location. This betrayal is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the story because it demonstrates how deeply the Syndicate's ideology has influenced him. Sandro does not fully understand the consequences of his actions. In his mind, contacting Zurab may feel like reconnecting with family or honoring his father's memory. The cult-like loyalty of the Nagazi organization has conditioned him to view betrayal of the Syndicate as morally wrong. This aspect of the story explores how criminal organizations manipulate identity and belonging. Sandro has grown up believing the Nagazi family represents strength, protection, and loyalty. Even after experiencing abuse and violence, breaking free psychologically proves far more difficult than escaping physically. Zurab's reaction further reveals the dangerous mentality of the Syndicate. Instead of treating Sandro like a grieving child, Zurab immediately uses the information to launch a violent attack. This demonstrates how the organization values loyalty and revenge above genuine family care. The attack on the DC Tower safehouse in Vienna becomes another major turning point in the story. The safehouse initially appears modern, secure, and isolated from the brutal prison environment. However, Zurab's assault destroys any illusion of safety. For Nick, the loss is especially painful because Yaz is not only her teammate but also her brother. Throughout the film, Nick has maintained emotional strength and professionalism even during extreme danger. However, Yaz's death cuts through her emotional defenses. It reminds the audience that beneath the tactical operations and combat expertise, these characters are still human beings capable of grief and emotional suffering. Tyler's reaction to Yaz's death is equally important. Tyler has already experienced immense personal loss through the death of his own son. Watching another person die because of violence deepens his guilt and emotional exhaustion. He begins to recognize that revenge-driven conflict destroys everyone involved, regardless of intentions. The team retreats to Tyler's cabin, returning to the isolated location introduced earlier in the film. The cabin once symbolized Tyler's emotional isolation and withdrawal from the world. Now, however, it becomes a place of emotional confrontation and reflection. The reunion between Tyler, Kitevan, and Mia is one of the most emotionally significant scenes in the entire movie. For much of the franchise, Tyler has been emotionally disconnected from his past. He buried his grief beneath violence, missions, and emotional detachment. Seeing Mia again forces him to finally confront the pain he has spent years avoiding. The revelation about Tyler's son is central to understanding his character. Tyler explains that he left on a mission before his son died from cancer. This confession carries enormous emotional weight because it reveals the source of Tyler's deepest guilt. The last memory his son had was watching his father leave. This detail transforms Tyler's emotional arc entirely. His guilt is not simply about losing his child. It is about absence, emotional failure, and regret. Tyler believes he abandoned his son during the most painful period of his life. No matter how many dangerous missions he survives, he cannot escape the feeling that he failed as a father. The scene with Mia is powerful because it strips away Tyler's hardened mercenary persona. He is no longer the unstoppable fighter battling enemies with weapons and tactics. Instead, he becomes a grieving father confronting emotional truth. Tyler's apology to Mia reflects years of buried pain. He acknowledges the damage caused by his emotional distance and his inability to prioritize family over violence and work. The emotional honesty in this moment is important because Tyler rarely expresses vulnerability openly. Mia's presence also represents forgiveness and emotional closure. Although their relationship was destroyed by tragedy, Mia understands Tyler's pain better than anyone else. Their conversation reveals that both characters have spent years carrying grief in different ways. This emotional confrontation gives Tyler's journey greater meaning. Throughout the film, he has risked his life protecting Kitevan and her children because subconsciously he was trying to redeem himself for failing his own family. Saving others became his way of searching for emotional forgiveness. At the same time, the story continues exploring the destructive nature of revenge through Zurab's character. After losing most of his men and his brother David, Zurab becomes consumed entirely by vengeance. His obsession grows increasingly irrational and self-destructive. Avtandil, Zurab's uncle and right-hand man, recognizes this danger. Avtandil serves as one of the few voices of wisdom within the Nagazi organization. He advises Zurab to abandon the pursuit of revenge before more lives are lost. Importantly, Oftandil also tells Zurab to become a better example for Sandro. This moment is thematically crucial because it highlights the possibility of breaking cycles of violence. Oftandil understands that Sandro's future is being shaped by the behavior of the adults around him. If Zurab continues pursuing revenge, Sandro will inherit the same toxic worldview that destroyed David and the Nagazi Syndicate. Oftandil's advice represents reason, restraint, and emotional maturity. He understands that endless revenge only creates further destruction. However, Zurab refuses to listen because vengeance has become inseparable from his identity. Zurab's decision to kill Oftandil is one of the clearest demonstrations of his moral collapse. By murdering his own uncle and advisor, Zurab proves that revenge has completely consumed him. He no longer values family, wisdom, or survival. Only hatred matters. This moment also reinforces one of the film's major themes: violent systems eventually destroy themselves from within. The Nagazi Syndicate was built on loyalty enforced through fear and brutality. As a result, internal betrayal and emotional instability become inevitable. Zurab's final challenge to Tyler at the airfield next to a church carries strong symbolic meaning. The church setting introduces themes of judgment, morality, sacrifice, and redemption into the climax. Tyler is essentially being drawn into a final confrontation where emotional and moral conflicts will be resolved alongside physical violence. Before heading to the airfield, Tyler leaves Nick behind to protect her. This decision demonstrates Tyler's emotional growth. Earlier in his life, Tyler often distanced himself emotionally because he feared loss and attachment. Now he acts out of genuine care for Nick's safety. Tyler understands the danger awaiting him and does not want Nick to die because of his personal conflict with Zurab. This protective instinct reveals how much Tyler has changed emotionally throughout the story. The final assault at the airfield showcases Sam Hargrave's mastery of action filmmaking once again. Tyler fights through the remaining Nagazi forces with brutal determination. The action is intense and violent, but emotionally it feels different from earlier sequences. This is no longer merely about survival. Tyler is fighting to end the cycle of revenge that has consumed everyone involved. Every enemy he confronts represents the destructive consequences of hatred, loyalty, and violence. When Tyler enters the church and finds Zurab alongside Sandro wearing an explosive vest, the emotional tension reaches its peak. Sandro's condition symbolizes how children become trapped within cycles of violence created by adults. The Vienna attack is important because it shows the global reach and determination of the Nagazi Syndicate. Tyler's enemies are not limited by borders or law enforcement. They operate like a private army driven by vengeance and loyalty. The visual contrast between the sleek modern architecture of the DC towers and the brutal violence occurring inside creates powerful cinematic tension. The elegant environment becomes another battlefield, reinforcing the film's idea that violence follows Tyler wherever he goes. Ketevan's reaction to Sandro's betrayal is emotionally heartbreaking. She scolds him for endangering the family, expressing both anger and despair. This moment reveals the pain of a mother realizing her son has been psychologically shaped by the same toxic environment she desperately tried to escape. Ketevan understands that Sandro's actions could get everyone killed. More importantly, she recognizes that the emotional influence of David and the Nagazi organization still controls him. Her disappointment is not merely about the betrayal itself but about the realization that escaping physically was not enough to save her son emotionally. Sandro's decision to abandon his mother and join Zurab during the chaos further deepens the tragedy. This moment symbolizes the triumph of indoctrination over family bonds. Sandro chooses the identity and loyalty system created by the Syndicate rather than the uncertain freedom offered by his mother and Tyler. From Sandro's perspective, joining Zurab may feel emotionally safer because it connects him to the only world he has ever known. The criminal organization offers structure, identity, and belonging, even though it is built on violence and manipulation. This storyline explores one of the film's darkest themes: how cycles of violence perpetuate themselves across generations. Sandro risks becoming another version of David because he has been raised inside an environment that glorifies power, revenge, and loyalty above empathy or morality. Tyler's reaction to Sandro's betrayal is also significant. Tyler understands trauma and emotional damage better than most characters in the film. He recognizes that Sandro is not simply malicious. The boy has been emotionally manipulated and psychologically conditioned for years. This understanding adds emotional complexity to Tyler's character. Despite the betrayal, Tyler still tries to protect Sandro because he sees him as another victim of the violent world surrounding the Nagazi syndicate. Thematically, this entire section of the film examines the difficulty of breaking free from toxic systems. Physical escape alone is not enough. Emotional conditioning, trauma, and identity can continue trapping people long after they leave dangerous environments. The prison riot, David's death, the train escape, and Sandro's betrayal collectively transform Extraction 2 from a straightforward rescue thriller into a deeper exploration of family trauma and generational violence. Sam Hargrave's direction ensures that the emotional stakes remain central even during the film's most explosive action scenes. Every gunfight, explosion, and chase sequence carries emotional consequences tied to loyalty, grief, and survival. Ultimately, this section of the film represents the heart of Extraction 2. It combines extraordinary action filmmaking with emotionally layered storytelling, creating a narrative where violence is never merely spectacle. Instead, every conflict reflects deeper emotional wounds and psychological struggles. The result is a powerful sequence that elevates the film beyond traditional action entertainment, making it both emotionally compelling and cinematically unforgettable. The final act of Extraction 2, 2023, is the emotional and thematic culmination of Tyler Rake's journey. While the film is celebrated for its explosive action sequences and technical brilliance, the closing section reveals that the true heart of the story lies in grief, redemption, family, sacrifice, and emotional healing. Every major event in this part of the film pushes Tyler closer toward confronting the emotional wounds that have haunted him since before the events of the first movie. At the same time, the climax explores the destructive consequences of revenge, the psychological damage caused by violent environments, and the possibility of redemption even for deeply broken individuals. After the devastating attack on the Vienna safe house, Tyler and his team manage to survive only through brutal combat and sheer determination. By this point in the story, the conflict has escalated far beyond a rescue mission. What began as an extraction operation has transformed into a personal war between Tyler and Zurab Radiani, the surviving leader of the Nagazi syndicate. The aftermath of the safe house battle immediately establishes the cost of this war. Tyler and his allies have fought through overwhelming odds, killing most of Zurab's heavily armed men. However, victory comes at a terrible price. The violence has become increasingly personal and emotionally destructive for everyone involved. The escape by helicopter is one of the final examples of the film's relentless pacing and intense action style. Even while retreating, Tyler's team remains under attack. The helicopter sequence reinforces the idea that there is no true safety in Tyler's world. Every escape leads directly into another confrontation. The danger never fully disappears. During the escape, Zurab mortally wounds Yaz. This moment is emotionally devastating because Yaz has represented loyalty, warmth, and humanity throughout the film. His relationship with Tyler and Nick created a sense of family within the team. Unlike the toxic and violent family structure of the Nagazi syndicate, Tyler's team was built on trust, respect, and shared survival. Yaz's death symbolizes the tragic consequences of revenge and violence. He is not killed because of greed or personal ambition. He dies because he chose to help protect innocent people. The emotional impact of his death is intensified by the fact that he remained loyal until the very end. For Nick, the loss is especially painful because Yaz is not only her teammate but also her brother. Throughout the film, Nick has maintained emotional strength and professionalism even during extreme danger. However, Yaz's death cuts through her emotional defenses. The explosive vest is not only a physical threat but also a metaphor for psychological manipulation. Sandro has been turned into a weapon by the violent ideology surrounding him. Zurab is willing to sacrifice even a child in pursuit of revenge. This moment becomes the ultimate test of Sandro's emotional journey. Throughout the film, Sandro has struggled between loyalty to the Nagazi family and the growing realization that their world is built on cruelty and destruction. Zurab forcing Sandro to take Tyler's pistol represents an attempt to complete Sandro's transformation into another violent member of the syndicate. If Sandro kills Tyler, he symbolically embraces the Nagazi ideology completely. However, Sandro refuses to shoot Tyler after finally recognizing the truth about David and Zurab. He realizes that the men he admired are not honorable protectors but emotionally broken individuals driven by cruelty and hatred. This realization is one of the most important moments in the film because it represents the possibility of breaking generational cycles of violence. Sandro chooses empathy and humanity over revenge and indoctrination. Tyler's role in this transformation is significant. Throughout the story, Tyler protected Sandro despite the boy's betrayal and emotional confusion. Unlike David and Zurab, Tyler never tried to control or manipulate him. Sandro ultimately recognizes this difference. Nick's arrival and her successful disarming of the explosive vest further reinforce the importance of trust and teamwork. While Tyler confronts Zurab physically, Nick saves Sandro emotionally and literally. Together, they represent an alternative to the toxic violence of the Nagazi syndicate. Tyler killing Zurab finally ends the blood feud that has driven the second half of the film. However, the moment is not triumphant in a traditional sense. There is no celebration or emotional satisfaction in the killing. Instead, it feels tragic and inevitable. Zurab's death represents the collapse of the violent world he inherited and perpetuated. His obsession with revenge ultimately destroys everything around him, including himself. After the battle, Tyler and Nick are arrested and imprisoned. This ending is important because it acknowledges consequences. Unlike many action films where protagonists escape legal accountability entirely, Extraction 2 recognizes that the destruction and violence surrounding Tyler cannot simply disappear without repercussions. The prison scenes near the ending mirror the earlier prison setting but with important emotional differences. Earlier prisons represented emotional entrapment and violence. Now Tyler's imprisonment feels calmer, almost reflective. He has finally confronted much of his emotional pain. Mia's visit to Tyler in prison provides the emotional closure he desperately needed. She informs him that Kitevan and her children are now in protective custody but financially ruined because their assets were frozen. Tyler's response reveals his emotional transformation. He tells Mia to give them the hidden cash from beneath the floorboards in his cabin. This act symbolizes generosity, responsibility, and compassion. Earlier in life, Tyler often prioritized missions and emotional avoidance over family obligations. Now he chooses to help others rebuild their lives. The most emotionally powerful moment occurs when Mia tells Tyler that their son died believing his father was a hero. This statement finally gives Tyler a measure of emotional peace. For years, Tyler believed his son's final memory was abandonment and disappointment. Hearing that his son still viewed him as heroic helps Tyler release some of the guilt that has haunted him throughout both films. This moment completes Tyler's redemption arc. Redemption does not erase his pain or undo his mistakes, but it allows him to move forward emotionally rather than remaining trapped by grief. The final scene involving the mysterious stranger introduces the future of the franchise while reinforcing Tyler's evolving identity. Tyler and Nick are offered another mission, suggesting that their story is far from over. However, Tyler is no longer the same emotionally broken mercenary introduced at the beginning of the film. Through protecting Kitevan's family, confronting his past, and surviving the conflict with Zurab, he has rediscovered emotional purpose and human connection. The ending leaves Tyler in a fascinating emotional position. He remains a man capable of extraordinary violence, but he now understands the emotional consequences of that violence more deeply than ever before. Ultimately, the final act of Extraction 2 succeeds because it combines intense action spectacle with genuine emotional depth. The film is not simply about defeating villains or surviving impossible missions. It is about broken people struggling to escape cycles of grief, revenge, and emotional isolation. Tyler Rake's journey becomes a story of redemption through protection, emotional honesty, and sacrifice. By the end of the film, he is no longer fighting merely to survive. He is fighting because he finally understands the value of protecting life, family, and hope in a world consumed by violence. The result is a conclusion that feels emotionally satisfying while still maintaining the brutal intensity and cinematic energy that define the Extraction franchise. The cast of Extraction 2, 2023, plays a major role in transforming the film from a straightforward action thriller into an emotionally layered and character-driven cinematic experience. While the movie is widely celebrated for its explosive action sequences, intense combat choreography, and technical filmmaking, the performances of the cast members provide the emotional foundation that makes the story compelling. Every major character contributes not only to the physical action but also to the themes of trauma, loyalty, redemption, family, violence, and emotional survival that define the film. The cast works together to create a world that feels grounded and emotionally believable despite the extreme situations depicted throughout the story. Each actor brings a unique energy to the film, helping to establish emotional tension, psychological complexity, and interpersonal conflict. The relationships between these characters ultimately become just as important as the gunfights and rescue missions. Tyler Rake is introduced as a man deeply damaged by both physical violence and emotional trauma. Before becoming a mercenary, Tyler served as a member of the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, one of the most elite military forces in the world. His military background explains his extraordinary combat abilities, tactical intelligence, and survival instincts. However, Extraction 2 focuses less on Tyler's professional skills and more on the psychological consequences of his life choices. Chris Hemsworth portrays Tyler as a man carrying immense guilt and emotional pain beneath his hardened exterior. Unlike many action protagonists who are written as emotionally invulnerable, Tyler is constantly haunted by grief, regret, and loneliness. Hemsworth communicates much of this pain through subtle facial expressions, silence, and physical body language rather than excessive dialogue. One of the most important aspects of Hemsworth's performance is the balance between physical intensity and emotional vulnerability. During combat scenes, Tyler appears brutal, relentless, and highly skilled. Yet outside of battle, he often seems emotionally exhausted and disconnected from the world around him. This contrast gives the character depth and realism. Tyler is capable of extraordinary violence, but the film never portrays him as emotionally unaffected by it. Every mission leaves psychological scars. Hemsworth's performance makes the audience understand that Tyler's greatest struggle is not physical survival but emotional redemption. The character's backstory involving the death of his son is central to his emotional journey. Tyler blames himself for not being present during his child's final moments, and this guilt shapes every aspect of his personality. Hemsworth portrays this emotional burden with restraint and sincerity, making Tyler's search for redemption believable and moving. The film also benefits greatly from Golshifteh Farahani's performance as Nick Khan, Tyler's trusted partner and fellow mercenary. Nick is one of the most important supporting characters in the franchise because she provides emotional balance, intelligence, and emotional stability within the chaos surrounding Tyler. Farahani portrays Nick as highly competent, calm under pressure, and emotionally resilient. She is not written as a stereotypical sidekick or secondary character existing solely to support the male protagonist. Instead, Nick is presented as an equal partner whose tactical abilities and leadership are essential to the team's survival. Nick's relationship with Tyler is built on mutual respect and shared experience rather than romance. This dynamic is one of the film's strengths because it creates emotional authenticity. Both characters understand the psychological cost of their profession, and their bond is based on trust forged through dangerous missions and survival. Farahani's performance also reveals Nick's emotional depth. While she remains composed during operations, moments involving her brother Yaz expose her vulnerability and humanity. She is emotionally strong but not emotionally detached. Nick's role in the film reflects another important theme: chosen family. Unlike the toxic family structures represented by the Nagazi Syndicate, Tyler, Nick, and Yaz form a family-like bond based on loyalty, trust, and protection. Farahani's performance helps establish this emotional connection, making the team feel believable and emotionally grounded. Adam Besser's portrayal of Yaz Khan adds warmth and humanity to the film. Yaz serves as both a skilled operative and an emotional bridge between Tyler and Nick. His personality brings moments of levity and emotional openness into an otherwise dark and violent story. Besser portrays Yaz as loyal, energetic, and compassionate despite the brutal nature of his work. He clearly trusts Tyler deeply and shares a close sibling bond with Nick. This emotional connection makes Yaz's eventual death one of the most heartbreaking moments in the film. Yaz represents innocence and humanity within the team dynamic. While Tyler often isolates himself emotionally and Nick remains professionally controlled, Yaz appears more emotionally expressive and socially connected. His presence prevents the film from becoming emotionally cold or overly grim. The tragedy of Yaz's death is amplified because Besser makes the character likable and relatable. The audience understands that Yaz is risking his life not for money or personal glory but because he believes in protecting others and supporting his chosen family. The antagonistic side of the story is led by Tornike Gogrichiani as Zurab Radiani. Zurab is one of the most emotionally driven villains in modern action cinema because his motivations are rooted in grief, loyalty, revenge, and wounded pride. Gograciani portrays Zurab as intense, dangerous, and emotionally unstable. Unlike cold or calculating villains, Zurab is driven almost entirely by emotion after the death of his brother David. His desire for revenge consumes his judgment and gradually destroys his humanity. One of the strongest aspects of Gograciani's performance is the emotional unpredictability he brings to the character. Zurab is violent and ruthless, but he is also deeply wounded by the loss of his brother and the collapse of his criminal empire. This emotional volatility makes him frightening because his actions become increasingly irrational and obsessive. Zurab's relationship with Sandro is particularly important because it reveals how violence perpetuates itself through emotional influence and manipulation. Zurab attempts to shape Sandro into another loyal member of the Nagazi syndicate, continuing the cycle of toxic masculinity and criminal identity. The performance avoids turning Zurab into a one-dimensional villain. While his actions are brutal and destructive, Gograciani portrays him as a product of the violent world he inherited and embraced. This complexity gives the film greater emotional depth. Tornike Bziava's portrayal of David Radiani is equally significant even though the character dies earlier in the story. David represents the origin of the family's trauma and the toxic ideology at the center of the Nagazi syndicate. David is portrayed as abusive, controlling, and emotionally manipulative. He views his family as possessions rather than individuals. Bziava gives the character a threatening presence that dominates every scene involving him. One of the most disturbing aspects of David's character is how he combines criminal authority with domestic abuse. His violence extends beyond the criminal world into his role as husband and father. This makes him more terrifying because the danger he represents is deeply personal. At the same time, the film carefully shows how David's influence psychologically shapes Sandro. Despite the abuse surrounding him, Sandro idolizes his father because he has been raised inside a culture that glorifies strength, power, and loyalty above compassion or morality. Bziava's performance establishes the emotional foundation for the later conflict involving Sandro and Zurab. Even after David's death, his influence continues shaping the decisions and emotional struggles of the characters around him. Tinotin Dalakishvili delivers a powerful performance as Ketevan Radiani, Mia's sister and the abused wife of David. Ketevan is one of the emotional centers of the film because she represents survival, motherhood, and resilience within an environment dominated by fear and violence. Dalakishvili portrays Ketevan as emotionally exhausted but determined to protect her children at all costs. Years of abuse and imprisonment have damaged her emotionally, yet she continues fighting for freedom and safety. Ketevan's relationship with Tyler becomes emotionally important because both characters understand pain, guilt, and emotional loss. Tyler sees in Ketevan a reflection of the suffering he has been trying to escape emotionally. One of the strongest aspects of Dalakishvili's performance is how she portrays fear and courage simultaneously. Ketevan is terrified of David and Zurab, yet she still risks everything to escape and save her children. This complexity makes her far more than a passive victim. Her emotional conflict with Sandro later in the film becomes especially heartbreaking. She realizes that her son has been psychologically influenced by the same toxic environment she desperately tried to escape. Dalakishvili conveys the pain of a mother watching violence emotionally consume her child. Andro Japarid's performance as Sandro Radiani is one of the most psychologically complex in the film. Sandro is not simply a child caught in dangerous circumstances, he is a teenager struggling with identity, loyalty, manipulation, and emotional confusion. Sandro idolizes his father David despite witnessing abuse and violence. This reflects the psychological reality of children raised in toxic or criminal environments. Sandro has been conditioned to associate masculinity and authority with violence and dominance. Japarid portrays Sandro's internal conflict effectively throughout the film. On one side, he loves his mother and sister. On the other, he feels emotionally connected to the Nagazi family structure because it shaped his entire understanding of loyalty and identity. His betrayal of Tyler's team by contacting Zurab is emotionally devastating precisely because the audience understands his confusion. Sandro is not malicious, he is psychologically trapped between competing emotional influences. The climax of Sandro's journey occurs when Zurab forces him to wear an explosive vest and kill Tyler. This moment represents the ultimate test of Sandro's humanity. He must choose between continuing the violent ideology of the Nagazi syndicate or rejecting it entirely. Japarid's performance during this scene is especially powerful because Sandro finally recognizes the emotional emptiness and cruelty of the men he once admired. His refusal to shoot Tyler symbolizes the breaking of generational cycles of violence. Miriam and Marta Kovziashvili portray Nina Radiani, the youngest member of the family. Although Nina has less dialogue and screen time than Sandro, her presence carries important symbolic and emotional meaning throughout the film. Nina represents innocence endangered by violent systems created by adults. Unlike Sandro, she is still young enough to remain emotionally untouched by the ideological influence of the Nagazi syndicate. Her vulnerability increases the emotional stakes of the rescue mission because the audience understands that Tyler and the team are protecting a child who deserves a future free from fear and violence. The dual casting of Miriam and Marta Kovziashvili allows the film to effectively portray Nina's emotional vulnerability and innocence during intense sequences. Nina's reactions to the chaos surrounding her reinforce the human cost of the conflict between Tyler and the Nagazi syndicate. Her relationship with Ketevan also strengthens the film's emotional themes surrounding motherhood and protection. Ketevan's determination to save Nina reflects a parent's desperate desire to prevent trauma from destroying the next generation. Collectively, the cast of Extraction 2 succeeds because each performance contributes to the film's emotional realism. The actors do not treat the story as simple action spectacle. Instead, they portray emotionally wounded individuals struggling with grief, loyalty, trauma, identity, and survival. The chemistry between the cast members is another major strength. Tyler's partnership with Nick and Yaz feels authentic because the actors create believable emotional trust and familiarity. Similarly, the dysfunctional relationships within the Radiani family feel psychologically convincing because of the emotional intensity brought by the performers. The film's emotional power depends heavily on these performances because the story itself is deeply rooted in family dynamics and emotional conflict. Without strong acting, the action sequences would risk feeling empty or repetitive. Instead, every fight and confrontation carries emotional meaning because the audience understands the characters involved. Chris Hemsworth's central performance anchors the film emotionally, but the supporting cast ensures that the world surrounding Tyler feels rich and believable. Golshifteh Farahani adds intelligence and emotional balance, Adam Besser provides warmth and humanity, while the Georgian cast members bring emotional complexity and authenticity to the family conflict at the center of the story. The casting choices also strengthen the film's international atmosphere. Extraction 2 operates within a global world involving mercenaries, criminal organizations, and cross-border conflicts. The diverse cast helps create a sense of realism and cultural specificity rather than reducing the story to generic Hollywood stereotypes. Ultimately, the cast of Extraction 2 transforms the movie into more than just an action thriller. Through emotionally committed performances, the actors create a story about broken families, emotional survival, redemption, and the struggle to escape cycles of violence. Their performances ensure that the audience cares not only about who survives the battles but also about the emotional journeys and psychological scars carried by each character. This emotional depth is one of the primary reasons why Extraction 2 stands out as one of the most compelling modern action films. The supporting cast of Extraction 2, 2023, plays a crucial role in enriching the film's world, deepening its emotional complexity, and expanding the themes of violence, loyalty, grief, revenge, and redemption that define the story. While Chris Hemsworth's Tyler Rake remains the emotional and narrative center of the film, the supporting characters surrounding him help shape the moral conflicts and emotional stakes that elevate Extraction 2 beyond a conventional action thriller. Each supporting actor contributes something important to the atmosphere and emotional structure of the movie. Some characters represent wisdom and restraint, others embody violence and revenge, while several symbolize emotional healing, trauma, or future possibilities for the franchise. Together, these performances create a layered cinematic world where even secondary characters carry thematic importance. One of the most important supporting characters in the film is Avtandil, portrayed by Dato Bakhtads. Avtandil functions as both a senior figure within the Nagazi syndicate and a symbolic representation of experience and realism inside a world consumed by violence. Throughout the story, the Nagazi organization is portrayed as brutal, loyal, and emotionally driven by pride and revenge. However, Avtandil stands apart from the younger and more reckless members of the syndicate because he understands the long-term consequences of endless violence. Unlike Zurab, who becomes emotionally consumed by hatred after his brother David's death, Avtandil recognizes that revenge only leads to destruction. Dato Bakhtads gives Avtandil a calm yet intimidating presence. He does not need to dominate scenes through loud aggression because his authority comes from experience and emotional control. He understands how criminal empires operate and how easily they collapse when emotions overpower strategy. One of Tandil's most important moments occurs when he advises Zurab to abandon his revenge campaign against Tyler Rake. This scene is emotionally and thematically significant because it reveals the internal fractures within the Nagazi syndicate. Tandil warns Zurab that continuing the conflict will only result in more death and suffering. More importantly, Tandil tells Zurab that he should set a better example for Sandro. This advice reflects one of the film's central themes, the destructive impact of violence on younger generations. Tandil understands that Sandro is emotionally vulnerable and still capable of choosing a different path. He realizes that if Sandro remains surrounded by revenge and brutality, he will eventually become another victim of the same violent system. This moment makes Tandil one of the few morally reflective figures within the criminal organization. He is still involved in a violent world, but he possesses enough wisdom to recognize its emotional emptiness. Zurab's decision to kill Tandil becomes a major turning point because it symbolizes the complete triumph of revenge over reason. By murdering the man trying to prevent further bloodshed, Zurab destroys the last voice of restraint within the syndicate. Tandil's death also symbolizes the collapse of the old order. He represents discipline, structure, and emotional control, while Zurab represents emotional chaos and obsessive vengeance. Once Tandil is gone, the Nagazi syndicate becomes fully consumed by destruction. Daniel Bernhardt's portrayal of Constantine adds another layer of physical threat and tactical danger to the film. Bernhardt is known for his martial arts background and physical screen presence, and his character reflects the brutal professionalism often associated with elite enforcers in action cinema. Constantine represents the militarized side of the Nagazi organization. Unlike emotionally driven characters such as Zurab, Constantine operates more like a professional combatant whose purpose is efficiency and violence. His presence reinforces the idea that the syndicate possesses not only emotional loyalty but also organized tactical power. Bernhardt's performance emphasizes physical intimidation and precision. He moves and fights with controlled aggression, making his scenes feel dangerous and intense. Characters like Constantine are important in action films because they create credible physical obstacles for the protagonist. Tyler Rake's abilities are extraordinary, so the enemies he faces must appear equally dangerous to maintain tension. Constantine helps accomplish this by serving as a highly capable opponent rather than a generic henchman. At the same time, Constantine's limited emotional complexity reflects the dehumanizing nature of criminal violence. He functions almost entirely through force and obedience, showing how individuals within violent systems can lose personal identity and become instruments of destruction. Irakli Kvirikadze's portrayal of Ivain contributes to the film's atmosphere of criminal hierarchy and organized brutality. Characters like Ivain help make the Nagazi syndicate feel like a functioning criminal empire rather than a collection of random enemies. Ivain represents the network of loyal followers surrounding David and Zurab. These characters embody the culture of fear, loyalty, and violence that sustains the organization. Even though they may not receive extensive emotional development individually, they are important because they demonstrate the scale of the criminal system Tyler is fighting against. The Nagazi syndicate is not simply dangerous because of a few leaders. It survives because many individuals have dedicated themselves to its ideology and power structure. Ivain reflects this larger organizational mentality. Levon Saginashvili's portrayal of Vakhtang is especially memorable because of the actor's imposing physical presence. Saginashvili, known for his extraordinary strength and massive build, brings a near-mythic level of intimidation to the film. Vakhtang represents raw physical force within the Nagazi syndicate. His character contributes heavily to the film's sense of danger because he appears almost unstoppable during confrontations. In action cinema, physically imposing opponents create tension by forcing protagonists into more desperate and creative forms of combat. What makes Vakhtang effective is not simply his size but the way the film uses him symbolically. He reflects the overwhelming force of the violent world Tyler is trying to survive. Characters like Vakhtang are less about emotional nuance and more about representing the brutal physical reality of the conflict. Tyler's battles against enemies like Vakhtang reinforce the grounded realism of the film's action style. Every fight appears exhausting and painful rather than stylized or effortless. George Losh's portrayal of Sergo contributes to the layered structure of the Nagazi organization as well. Like Ivain and other supporting antagonists, Sergo helps create the feeling of an interconnected criminal network bound together by loyalty and fear. The presence of multiple named members within the syndicate strengthens the realism of the story. Instead of presenting the organization as faceless villains, the film shows a functioning hierarchy with relationships, loyalties, and internal dynamics. This detail is important because it makes the conflict feel larger than Tyler versus a single enemy. He is confronting an entire culture built around violence, family loyalty, and revenge. One of the most emotionally significant supporting performances comes from Olga Kurylenko as Mia, Tyler's ex-wife and the sister of Kitevan. Mia's role in the film is relatively limited in terms of screen time, but emotionally she is one of the most important characters in Tyler Rake's entire story. Mia represents Tyler's unresolved grief and emotional guilt. Their marriage was destroyed largely because of the death of their son and Tyler's inability to emotionally process that tragedy. Throughout both Extraction films, Tyler has carried deep guilt about leaving on a mission before his son died from cancer. Olga Kurylenko portrays Mia with emotional restraint and quiet sadness. Rather than expressing dramatic anger or bitterness constantly, Mia appears emotionally exhausted by years of grief and emotional distance. Her scenes with Tyler are some of the most emotionally powerful moments in the film because they force Tyler to confront the emotional pain he has spent years avoiding. Mia understands Tyler better than almost anyone because she experienced the same devastating loss. One of the key strengths of Kurylenko's performance is the sense of emotional history she creates with Hemsworth. Even in brief conversations, the audience can feel years of unresolved pain, regret, and lost intimacy between the characters. Mia also represents forgiveness and emotional healing. While their relationship cannot return to what it once was, she still recognizes Tyler's humanity and emotional suffering. Her final conversation with him in prison becomes crucial to Tyler's redemption arc. When Mia tells Tyler that their son died believing his father was a hero, the moment becomes emotionally transformative. For years, Tyler believed he had failed his son completely. Mia's words finally give him a measure of emotional peace. This scene is essential because Tyler's emotional journey throughout the franchise is fundamentally about guilt and redemption. Mia's forgiveness allows him to begin releasing the emotional burden he has carried for years. Mia's connection to Kitevan also reinforces the film's focus on family relationships. The rescue mission begins because Mia wants to save her sister and her children from David's abusive control. This emotional connection gives the mission personal meaning for Tyler. The mysterious stranger portrayed by Idris Elba introduces an entirely different dimension to the Extraction universe. Credited as Olcott, the character appears briefly but has enormous narrative significance. Idris Elba's natural charisma and commanding presence immediately make the character intriguing. Unlike many figures in the film who operate through visible violence, Olcott exudes power through calmness, intelligence, and mystery. His first appearance changes the direction of Tyler's life completely. At a moment when Tyler has isolated himself emotionally and physically after surviving near death, Olcott arrives offering a new mission connected to Tyler's past. The character functions almost like a shadowy architect operating behind global conflicts and covert operations. His calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the brutal violence dominating the rest of the film. One of the most interesting aspects of Olcott is how little the audience actually learns about him. This mystery creates intrigue and hints at a much larger world existing beyond the events of Extraction 2. The final scene involving Olcott strongly suggests the expansion of the franchise into a broader cinematic universe involving covert missions, international operations, and interconnected characters. Idris Elba's presence adds credibility and excitement to this possibility because he carries the authority and screen presence necessary for a major franchise figure. Olcott also symbolizes Tyler's inability to fully escape his violent world. Even after confronting his emotional trauma and surviving another devastating mission, Tyler is drawn back into action by forces larger than himself. At the same time, Olcott represents opportunity and purpose. Tyler's life before the mission was emotionally empty and directionless. By the end of the film, Tyler has rediscovered emotional connection and purpose, making the possibility of future missions feel emotionally different from before. Another fascinating detail in the film is director Sam Hargrave's cameo appearance as a gravedigger. While brief, this cameo carries symbolic significance considering Hargrave's deep involvement in shaping the Extraction franchise. The gravedigger role subtly reflects many of the film's themes involving death, survival, and rebirth. Tyler Rake himself is almost a symbolic figure who has repeatedly survived situations that should have killed him. Tyler spends much of the story emotionally haunted by death, the death of his son, the deaths caused by his profession, and even his own near-death experiences. Hargrave's cameo as a gravedigger quietly reinforces these themes. From a filmmaking perspective, the cameo also serves as a small tribute to Hargrave's personal investment in the project. As both director and former stunt coordinator, Hargrave's creative identity is deeply tied to the physical and emotional intensity of the Extraction films. The supporting cast collectively strengthens the film's emotional and thematic complexity in several important ways. First, they expand the emotional world surrounding Tyler Rake. Without characters like Mia, Nick, Yaz, Kitevan, and Sandro, Tyler would risk becoming emotionally isolated as a protagonist. These relationships reveal different sides of his personality, including guilt, compassion, protectiveness, and vulnerability. Second, the supporting antagonists help create a believable criminal ecosystem. Characters such as Zurab, David, of Tandil, Konstantin, Vakhtang, and Sergo make the Nagazi syndicate feel like a real organization with hierarchy, loyalty systems, and internal conflict. Third, the cast reinforces the film's major themes surrounding cycles of violence and generational trauma. Sandro's emotional manipulation by the syndicate becomes more believable because of the influence exerted by characters like David and Zurab. Finally, the performances ensure that the action scenes carry emotional stakes. Every major battle matters because the audience understands the emotional relationships and psychological conflicts behind the violence. The film's emotional depth depends heavily on these supporting performances. Action alone would not sustain the story's impact without believable human relationships and emotional consequences. Ultimately, the supporting cast of Extraction 2 transforms the movie into more than a visually impressive action thriller. Through emotionally committed performances and layered character dynamics, the actors help create a story about grief, revenge, emotional survival, and the struggle to break free from cycles of violence. Each supporting character contributes something essential to Tyler Rake's journey, whether through love, loyalty, manipulation, wisdom, or conflict. Together, they form the emotional architecture of the film, allowing Extraction 2 to succeed not only as a spectacle-driven action movie but also as a deeply human story about damaged people searching for redemption and meaning in a violent world. The development of Extraction 2, 2023, represents one of the most important phases in the evolution of modern streaming action cinema. Following the enormous success of the first Extraction film, the sequel was not treated simply as another action movie continuation. Instead, it became the foundation for a much larger vision involving franchise expansion, cinematic world-building, character exploration, and the transformation of Netflix into a serious competitor in large-scale blockbuster filmmaking. The early development process reveals how the filmmakers, producers, and streaming platform recognized the cultural and commercial impact of the original movie. Extraction had quickly become one of Netflix's biggest action successes, attracting a massive global audience through its intense action sequences, emotional storytelling, and charismatic lead performance from Chris Hemsworth. As a result, the sequel was developed not only to continue Tyler Rake's story but also to establish a broader cinematic universe capable of sustaining multiple films and interconnected narratives. The announcement in May 2020 that Joe Russo would return to write the sequel immediately signaled continuity in creative vision. Joe Russo, alongside his brother Anthony Russo, had already become one of the most influential figures in modern blockbuster filmmaking due to their work on large-scale franchise projects. Their involvement gave Extraction 2 a level of creative ambition that extended beyond the standard action sequel formula. Joe Russo's role as writer was especially important because the first Extraction film succeeded not merely because of its action scenes but because of the emotional depth underlying Tyler Rake's character. The sequel needed to preserve that emotional foundation while expanding the scale, complexity, and mythology of the world. Russo's writing approach focused heavily on character-driven storytelling within a brutal action environment. Rather than treating action as empty spectacle, the screenplay for Extraction 2 continued exploring themes such as grief, redemption, trauma, emotional isolation, and family loyalty. This emphasis on emotional storytelling helped separate the franchise from many generic action films that rely solely on explosions and combat. The return of Sam Hargrave as director was equally significant. Hargrave had directed the first Extraction after building a long career as one of Hollywood's most respected stunt coordinators. His transition from stunt work to directing brought a unique perspective to action filmmaking. Unlike directors who rely heavily on rapid editing and exaggerated visual effects, Hargrave emphasizes physical realism, spatial continuity, and immersive combat choreography. His action sequences are designed to make audiences feel physically present within the violence rather than detached observers. This style became one of the defining features of the Extraction franchise. The famous long-take action scenes from the first film gained enormous attention because they combined technical complexity with emotional intensity. Hargrave's return ensured that the sequel would continue pushing the boundaries of action cinematography and stunt coordination. Chris Hemsworth's return as Tyler Rake was perhaps the most essential component of the sequel's development. Tyler had become the emotional anchor of the franchise, and Hemsworth's performance was widely praised for balancing brutal physicality with emotional vulnerability. Hemsworth's involvement also demonstrated Netflix's growing willingness to invest heavily in blockbuster-level streaming content. Reports that Hemsworth was paid $20 million for the film reflected the increasing financial scale of streaming productions competing directly with theatrical Hollywood franchises. This salary was significant not only because of its size but because it symbolized the changing entertainment industry landscape. Streaming platforms were no longer producing smaller-scale content exclusively. They were now capable of financing projects with budgets, stars, and production values comparable to major theatrical releases. Hemsworth's star power was crucial to the franchise's success because he brought both physical credibility and emotional depth to Tyler Rake. Prior to Extraction, Hemsworth was already globally recognized for playing Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, Tyler Rake allowed him to explore a darker, more grounded, and emotionally damaged type of character. The development of Extraction 2 benefited enormously from this contrast. Audiences already associated Hemsworth with large-scale action spectacle, but the Extraction films allowed him to demonstrate greater emotional nuance and dramatic intensity. The decision to continue Tyler's story after the ending of the first film was itself a major creative challenge. In the original movie, Tyler appeared to sacrifice himself during the rescue mission in Dhaka. His apparent death carried emotional significance because it completed a redemption arc connected to his guilt over losing his son. Bringing Tyler back for a sequel required careful narrative development to avoid weakening the emotional impact of the first film's conclusion. The filmmakers approached this challenge by emphasizing Tyler's physical and emotional recovery rather than simply treating his survival casually. This development choice reflected the franchise's commitment to emotional realism. Tyler's survival came with consequences, physical scars, emotional exhaustion, and psychological trauma. The sequel storyline therefore became less about resurrecting an invincible hero and more about exploring whether Tyler could find emotional meaning after surviving near death. In December 2020, the Russo brothers revealed even more ambitious plans for the franchise. They stated their intention to develop a broader series of films set within the Extraction universe. This announcement transformed perceptions of the franchise entirely. Rather than functioning as standalone action movies, the Extraction films were now being positioned as the beginning of a larger interconnected cinematic world. This strategy reflected broader trends within modern entertainment, where audiences increasingly engage with long-form franchises featuring recurring characters, spin-offs, and expanding mythology. The Russo brothers understood that the world introduced in the first Extraction film contained enormous storytelling potential. The universe involved international mercenaries, criminal syndicates, covert operations, intelligence networks, and morally complex characters operating across multiple countries and cultures. By expanding the franchise into a cinematic universe, the filmmakers could explore different regions, organizations, and character backstories while maintaining thematic continuity. This approach also allowed Netflix to develop its own action-oriented franchise ecosystem similar to what major studios had achieved theatrically. The streaming era had created intense competition for audience attention, and recognizable franchises became increasingly valuable. The Extraction universe offered several advantages for expansion. Unlike superhero franchises dependent on fantasy elements and massive visual effects, Extraction operated within a grounded, realistic world. This realism made the universe flexible and adaptable. New stories could involve different mercenaries, criminal organizations, geopolitical conflicts, or rescue operations while remaining connected through recurring themes and characters. The universe could expand horizontally rather than depending solely on Tyler Rake's personal storyline. Joe and Anthony Russo's comments about exploring previously introduced characters demonstrated their understanding that audiences had emotionally connected with more than just Tyler. Supporting characters such as Nick Khan, Yaz, and Soju possessed their own histories, motivations, and emotional depth. This character-driven approach to franchise expansion is important because it prevents the universe from feeling mechanically constructed. Instead of introducing random spin-offs solely for commercial purposes, the filmmakers intended to build upon existing emotional relationships and narrative threads established in earlier films. One of the most interesting rumors emerging during development involved a possible origin story for Randeep Huda's character Soju. Soju had become one of the breakout characters from the first Extraction film despite functioning initially as a secondary figure. In the original movie, Soju was introduced as a former Special Forces operator working for Ovi Mahajan's family. His mission often conflicted with Tyler's, yet the two characters gradually developed mutual respect while surviving overwhelming violence together. What made Soju memorable was his emotional complexity. He was not a straightforward hero or villain. Instead, he was a desperate father willing to risk everything to protect his own family and restore honor. His motivations mirrored Tyler's emotional struggles in many ways. Randeep Huda's performance brought intensity, humanity, and emotional realism to the character, making him one of the most compelling figures in the franchise. As a result, audiences and filmmakers alike recognized the potential for deeper exploration of his backstory. The rumor about an origin story reflected the broader creative possibilities within the Extraction universe. Characters like Soju existed within a morally gray world filled with personal sacrifice, corruption, and survival. Their histories could support emotionally rich standalone stories while expanding the mythology of the franchise. An origin story for Soju would also have represented an important opportunity for international storytelling. One of the defining strengths of Extraction is its global perspective. This international focus distinguishes the series from many traditional Hollywood action franchises. Characters come from different cultural backgrounds, and the stories often involve local conflicts shaped by regional power structures and criminal networks. Developing spin-offs or interconnected stories involving international characters would strengthen the authenticity and global appeal of the franchise. It would also allow the filmmakers to explore different action styles, environments, and cultural tensions. The development process of Extraction 2 also reflected changing audience expectations for action cinema. Modern viewers increasingly demand emotional depth alongside spectacle. Purely visual action without compelling characters or emotional stakes often struggles to maintain long-term audience investment. The filmmakers clearly recognized this shift. Every major creative decision surrounding Extraction 2 emphasized emotional continuity, character psychology, and thematic exploration alongside large-scale action. Tyler Rake's emotional trauma remained central to the sequel's narrative development. The film continued examining grief, guilt, fatherhood, emotional isolation, and redemption. Similarly, supporting characters received greater emotional complexity rather than functioning merely as action accessories. This focus on emotional storytelling strengthened the franchise's identity. Many action films feature impressive choreography and visual effects, but fewer succeed in creating emotionally resonant characters audiences genuinely care about. Another major aspect of the film's development involved balancing realism with cinematic spectacle. Sam Hargrave's directing style emphasized practical stunt work, immersive camera movement, and grounded combat sequences. This approach required extensive planning, physical training, and technical coordination during development. Unlike heavily CGI-dependent action films, Extraction 2 relied heavily on practical stunt execution and carefully choreographed long takes. The development process therefore involved close collaboration between writers, stunt coordinators, cinematographers, and performers. Chris Hemsworth underwent intense physical preparation to portray Tyler Rake convincingly once again. The character's combat style combines military precision with brutal improvisation, requiring Hemsworth to perform physically demanding sequences under challenging conditions. The development of the sequel's action scenes was likely influenced heavily by the reception of the first film's famous Wanna sequence, a seemingly continuous action shot involving car chases, gunfights, and hand-to-hand combat. Audiences and critics praised the sequence for its immersive intensity and technical ambition. As a result, Extraction 2 sought to surpass the original film's action achievements. The prison riot sequence, train battle, and safe house assault were designed not merely as action scenes but as cinematic experiences combining technical complexity with emotional storytelling. The Russo brothers' vision for a cinematic universe also required long-term narrative planning. Expanding the franchise meant introducing characters and organizations capable of sustaining future stories. Idris Elba's mysterious character in Extraction 2 reflects this strategy clearly. His brief appearance hints at larger covert networks operating behind the scenes, suggesting that Tyler's missions are part of a much bigger world. This approach mirrors successful franchise-building techniques used in other cinematic universes, where secondary characters and unresolved mysteries create anticipation for future installments. However, the Extraction franchise differs because its world remains grounded and morally ambiguous. There are no superheroes or supernatural elements. Instead, the stories revolve around human survival, political corruption, organized crime, and emotional trauma. This realism gives the universe a distinctive identity. The danger feels immediate and personal because the conflicts are rooted in recognizable human struggles rather than fantasy. The development of Extraction 2 therefore represented more than the creation of a sequel. It marked the transformation of a successful standalone action film into a major franchise with long-term ambitions. Netflix's investment in the project demonstrated confidence in the future of large-scale streaming action cinema. The platform recognized that audiences were willing to embrace emotionally driven blockbuster storytelling outside traditional theatrical systems. The collaboration between Joe Russo, Sam Hargrave, Chris Hemsworth, and the broader creative team ensured continuity in tone, style, and emotional focus while allowing the franchise to expand in scope and ambition. Ultimately, the development of Extraction 2 reveals how modern action franchises are evolving. Spectacle alone is no longer enough. Audiences seek emotional depth, interconnected storytelling, memorable characters, and immersive cinematic experiences. By combining intense action filmmaking with emotionally grounded character development and ambitious franchise planning, the creators of Extraction 2 positioned the series as one of the most significant modern action properties in streaming entertainment. The film's development process reflects both the changing nature of Hollywood and the growing importance of global, emotionally resonant storytelling within blockbuster cinema. The filming of Extraction 2, 2023, represents one of the most ambitious and technically demanding productions in modern action cinema. While audiences primarily experience the film through its breathtaking action sequences, emotionally intense performances, and immersive visual storytelling, the production process behind the scenes was equally remarkable. Every stage of filming reflected the filmmaker's determination to push the boundaries of action filmmaking while maintaining realism, emotional intensity, and cinematic immersion. The production journey of Extraction 2 was shaped by several major factors, including the global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the filmmaker's commitment to practical stunt work, the challenge of creating elaborate long-take action scenes, international location shooting, and the technical demands of modern digital cinematography. The filming process ultimately became an essential part of the film's identity because the visual style and physical realism of the action sequences depended heavily on how the movie was shot originally. Filming for the sequel was scheduled to begin in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, in September 2021. Australia had already become a major centre for large-scale international film productions due to its advanced filmmaking infrastructure, experienced crews, tax incentives, and diverse shooting locations. Sydney was especially significant because Chris Hemsworth himself has strong connections to Australia, and portions of the production team were already familiar with working there. The decision to initially plan filming in Australia reflected practical and creative considerations. Australia offered controlled studio environments, experienced stunt teams, and logistical support capable of handling a production as physically demanding as Extraction 2. Moreover, the country's film industry had continued operating relatively effectively during earlier stages of the pandemic compared to many other global regions. However, the COVID-19 pandemic dramatically affected the global entertainment industry during this period. Productions across the world faced shutdowns, delays, travel restrictions, health protocols, quarantine requirements, and financial uncertainty. Large-scale action productions like Extraction 2 were particularly vulnerable because they involved international crews, extensive stunt work, and complex location shooting. As pandemic-related measures intensified, the production was moved from Australia to Prague in the Czech Republic. This relocation became one of the defining aspects of the film's production process because Prague ultimately shaped much of the movie's visual atmosphere and logistical structure. Prague has become one of Europe's most important filmmaking centers over the past several decades. The city offers historic architecture, versatile urban environments, skilled local crews, and production facilities capable of supporting large international projects. Additionally, the Czech Republic had developed a strong reputation for accommodating major Hollywood productions efficiently. Moving production to Prague was not simply a logistical adjustment. It also influenced the visual tone and environmental realism of the film. Much of Extraction 2 features cold, harsh, urban landscapes that reinforce the emotional themes of isolation, brutality, and survival running throughout the story. The architecture and atmosphere of Prague helped create the grounded realism that defines the Extraction franchise. The city's streets, industrial areas, and older European environments contributed significantly to the film's gritty visual identity. On November 29, 2021, director Sam Hargrave officially announced that principal photography had begun in Prague. This marked the true beginning of the film's physical production after months of uncertainty and preparation. The beginning of principal photography was especially significant because Extraction 2 required enormous coordination between stunt teams, camera operators, actors, production designers, and visual effects artists. Unlike dialogue-heavy dramas or studio-contained productions, this film depended heavily on physical movement, environmental interaction, and large-scale practical action. Sam Hargrave's role during filming was particularly important because of his background as a stunt coordinator. Hargrave approached filmmaking differently from many traditional directors. Instead of treating action sequences as separate from storytelling, he viewed physical movement and combat as essential parts of character development and emotional narrative. This philosophy heavily influenced the filming process. Every fight scene, chase sequence, and stunt was designed not merely for spectacle but to reflect the emotional state of the characters involved. Tyler Rake's combat style, exhaustion, injuries, and tactical decisions were all tied closely to his psychological condition. Chris Hemsworth announced on December 4, 2021, that he had begun filming his scenes. Hemsworth's involvement in the physical production process was extremely demanding because Tyler Rake is one of the most physically intense roles of his career. Unlike superhero films that often rely heavily on visual effects and fantasy-based action, Extraction 2 emphasized grounded realism. Hemsworth performed extensive physical action involving hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, tactical movement, running, climbing, and large-scale stunt coordination. Preparing for such a role required intense physical training. Hemsworth needed not only muscular strength but also endurance, mobility, and combat choreography precision. The character of Tyler Rake constantly appears exhausted, injured, and physically strained, meaning the performance demanded both athletic ability and emotional realism. The physical demands became even greater because of the film's famous long-take sequences. These scenes required actors to maintain continuous performance intensity for extended periods without interruption. Mistakes during these takes could force complicated resets involving dozens of performers, stunt teams, vehicles, explosives, and camera movements. One of the defining technical aspects of Extraction 2 was the continued use of long-take filmmaking strategies from the first movie. The original Extraction became famous for its seemingly continuous action sequences that placed audiences directly inside chaotic combat environments. The sequel sought to expand this style even further. Long takes create a unique form of cinematic immersion because they eliminate the emotional distance created by rapid editing. Instead of watching fragmented pieces of action assembled together, viewers experience events almost in real time. This technique required extraordinary coordination during filming. Camera operators, actors, stunt performers, and practical effects teams had to move together with near-perfect timing. Every movement needed careful choreography because the camera itself became an active participant within the action. The production used ARRI Alexa Mini LF cameras, which played a crucial role in achieving the film's visual style. These cameras are highly respected within the film industry for their image quality, dynamic range, and ability to capture cinematic detail while remaining relatively lightweight and mobile. The lightweight nature of the Alexa Mini LF was especially important for Extraction 2 because the camera frequently moved through complex environments during action scenes. Operators needed flexibility to navigate vehicles, stairwells, crowded sets, explosions, and hand-to-hand combat without sacrificing image stability or visual clarity. The visual style achieved through these cameras contributed heavily to the film's immersive realism. The cinematography emphasized natural lighting, environmental texture, and grounded visual detail rather than exaggerated stylization. One of the most technically ambitious sequences filmed during production was the prison riot and train escape sequence. This scene required enormous logistical coordination because it combined multiple forms of action into what appeared to be a continuous cinematic experience. The sequence involved prison combat, crowd control, explosions, gunfights, moving vehicles, rooftop action, and a train battle, all integrated into a flowing visual structure. Filming such a sequence required months of planning and rehearsal. Practical stunt work became central to the film's identity during production. Sam Hargrave strongly favored practical action whenever possible because it creates physical authenticity that audiences subconsciously recognize. Instead of relying excessively on computer-generated imagery, the production used real environments, real stunt performers, practical explosions, and physical choreography. This approach gave the violence weight and realism. When Tyler fights enemies, audiences can feel physical impact because performers are genuinely interacting within real spaces. The camera movement reinforces this realism by remaining physically connected to the action rather than observing from detached angles. Further filming began in Vienna, Austria, on January 28, 2022, and continued until February 14. Vienna introduced another important visual and thematic layer to the production. The city's modern architecture and urban sophistication contrasted sharply with the prison environments and industrial settings used earlier in the film. The sequences shot in Vienna involved the DC Towers area in Donau City, which became the setting for the safehouse attack and several major action scenes. The DC Towers themselves are visually striking modern skyscrapers, and their inclusion gave the film a sleek, international atmosphere. The contrast between polished urban architecture and brutal violence created powerful cinematic tension. Shooting in Vienna also reinforced the global nature of the Extraction universe. Tyler Rake's missions move across countries and political environments, making the franchise feel international rather than geographically limited. Location shooting in real cities added authenticity to the story. Instead of relying entirely on studio sets, the filmmakers integrated real-world architecture and environments into the narrative. This grounded the film visually and emotionally. The Vienna sequences required extensive coordination with local authorities, stunt teams, and production crews because large-scale action scenes in urban areas involve significant safety and logistical challenges. Filming action scenes in practical locations is far more complicated than working exclusively on sound stages. Streets may need closure, buildings require preparation, stunt rigging must be secured safely, and camera paths need careful design. Additionally, the production had to continue operating under pandemic-related safety measures. COVID-19 protocols added another layer of complexity to every aspect of filming. Large productions during this period often required regular testing, controlled working environments, quarantines, and contingency planning in case cast or crew members became ill. Maintaining such protocols while filming physically demanding action sequences was extremely challenging. Despite these obstacles, the production successfully completed filming on April 6, 2022. The completion of principal photography represented a major achievement considering the scale and technical complexity of the film. However, modern blockbuster filmmaking rarely ends with principal photography alone. Post-production, editing, sound design, visual effects, and additional photography often continue shaping the final product for months afterward. The editing process for Extraction 2 was especially important because the film's long-take style required precise pacing and seamless transitions. Even scenes appearing continuous on screen often involved hidden cuts and carefully planned editing techniques. Editors needed to maintain the illusion of uninterrupted movement while preserving narrative clarity and emotional intensity. The balance between realism and cinematic rhythm became essential during post-production. Sound design also played a massive role in enhancing the film's immersive style. Gunfire, explosions, environmental noise, physical impacts, and character breathing were carefully layered to create visceral intensity. The soundscape contributes significantly to the audience's emotional experience. During action sequences, viewers feel trapped within chaos because the sound design emphasizes confusion, pressure, and exhaustion alongside visual movement. Reshoots took place in Prague in November 2022. Reshoots are a normal part of major film productions and do not necessarily indicate problems. In many cases, they allow filmmakers to improve emotional clarity, refine pacing, expand character moments, or strengthen action continuity. For a film as technically ambitious as Extraction 2, reshoots likely provided opportunities to perfect transitions, strengthen emotional beats, or enhance narrative coherence. Modern action films often evolve significantly during editing. Directors may discover that certain scenes require additional emotional context or visual adjustments to maximize impact. Sam Hargrave's attention to detail suggests the reshoots were probably focused on maintaining the high standards established by the first film while ensuring the sequel felt even more emotionally and visually immersive. Another important aspect of the filming process was the collaboration between departments. Extraction 2 depended heavily on integration between stunt coordination, cinematography, production design, costume design, visual effects, and actor performance. The action scene succeeded because every department worked toward the same grounded, immersive vision. Costumes needed to appear realistic and functional. Sets had to withstand physical destruction. Camera rigs required mobility. Stunt choreography had to match character psychology. This level of coordination reflects the increasingly sophisticated nature of modern action filmmaking. Action cinema today involves enormous technical artistry and planning rather than simple spectacle creation. The production process of Extraction 2 also reflected broader changes within the film industry itself. Streaming platforms like Netflix were now financing productions with theatrical-level ambition and technical sophistication. The film's global production, major star involvement, advanced cinematography, and large-scale action sequences demonstrated how streaming originals had evolved into serious cinematic experiences capable of competing with major studio releases. Ultimately, the filming of Extraction 2 became an essential part of the film's artistic identity. The grounded realism, immersive action style, emotional intensity, and visual authenticity audiences experienced on screen were all direct results of the production methods used during filming. From the pandemic-related relocation to Prague, to the technically demanding long takes, to the international location shooting in Vienna, every stage of production contributed to the film's unique atmosphere and cinematic power. The result was a visually and emotionally immersive action film that pushed the boundaries of modern stunt filmmaking while maintaining strong emotional storytelling and grounded realism. The release and reception of Extraction 2, 2023, marked a major moment not only for the franchise itself but also for the evolution of modern streaming blockbuster cinema. By the time the film arrived on Netflix in June 2023, the Extraction series had already established itself as one of the platform's most successful and recognizable action properties. The sequel therefore carried enormous expectations from audiences, critics, Netflix executives, and the filmmakers themselves. The release of Extraction 2 represented far more than the arrival of another action movie on a streaming platform. It symbolized Netflix's growing ability to compete with traditional theatrical studios by producing large-scale, internationally appealing cinematic experiences with blockbuster-level production values, major Hollywood stars, and ambitious franchise-building potential. The film's premiere strategy, global release model, audience response, and streaming performance all reflected the changing landscape of the entertainment industry during the streaming era. Extraction 2 became an example of how streaming platforms had transformed audience viewing habits and redefined the concept of blockbuster success. Netflix held the film's official premiere in New York City on June 12, 2023, just days before the worldwide streaming release. Premieres remain important cultural and promotional events even in the streaming era because they generate media attention, reinforce the prestige of a project, and create excitement among audiences before release. The New York premiere was especially significant because it emphasized that Extraction 2 was not being treated as disposable streaming content. Instead, Netflix positioned the film as a major cinematic event worthy of large-scale publicity and industry attention. The presence of the cast at the premiere reinforced the film's status as one of Netflix's flagship productions. Chris Hemsworth's attendance attracted significant media coverage because of his global popularity and established reputation as one of the world's most recognizable action stars. Hemsworth's involvement brought mainstream visibility and credibility to the project. By 2023, he had already become closely associated with blockbuster filmmaking through his role as Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, Extraction allowed him to showcase a different kind of action performance, one rooted in grounded realism, emotional vulnerability, and physical brutality rather than fantasy spectacle. The premiere also highlighted the international nature of the Extraction franchise. Cast members from different countries and cultural backgrounds attended, reflecting the film's global identity. Unlike many Hollywood action movies that remain centered primarily on American perspectives, Extraction 2 embraced international locations, multinational casts, and globally connected storytelling. This global identity became one of the franchise's defining strengths. Netflix operates as an international streaming platform with audiences spread across dozens of countries, and Extraction 2 was specifically designed to appeal to viewers worldwide rather than targeting a narrow domestic market alone. The release date of June 16, 2023, was strategically important. Summer has traditionally been associated with blockbuster entertainment, particularly action films designed to attract massive audiences. Although streaming services operate differently from theatrical studios, the timing still mattered because viewers associate summer releases with large-scale entertainment experiences. Netflix's decision to release Extraction 2 in June positioned it as a major summer event for streaming audiences. This approach mirrored traditional blockbuster release strategies while adapting them to home viewing culture. One of the most fascinating aspects of the film's release was how it reflected changing audience behavior during the streaming era. In traditional theatrical distribution, box office numbers serve as the primary measure of success. Streaming platforms, however, evaluate success differently using metrics such as viewership numbers, viewing hours, subscriber engagement, and global audience retention. This shift fundamentally changes how films are consumed and discussed culturally. Instead of audiences gathering in theaters over opening weekends, viewers can watch films immediately from home at their own pace. This accessibility dramatically increases global reach. For Extraction 2, this meant audiences from around the world could experience the film simultaneously without the delays often associated with theatrical international rollouts. The result was a worldwide shared viewing experience generated through streaming rather than cinemas. The accessibility of Netflix also contributed to the film's enormous audience reach. Viewers who might not normally visit theaters for an action movie could easily watch Extraction 2 from home, increasing the franchise's popularity across different demographics. Another major advantage of the streaming model was repeat viewership. Action films like Extraction 2 often contain visually dense and technically complex sequences that viewers enjoy revisiting multiple times. Streaming platforms make repeat viewing effortless, encouraging longer engagement periods. The reported audience numbers following the release demonstrated the film's substantial popularity. According to viewership estimates, Extraction 2 attracted approximately 5.3 million unique viewers worldwide on Netflix during the week of June 26 to July 2, 2023. These numbers are significant because they reflect sustained audience interest beyond the initial release weekend. In the streaming era, longevity and continued engagement often matter as much as immediate opening day attention. The reported 8.5 million hours watched during that same period further illustrated the film's strong performance. Viewing hours metrics are especially important for streaming platforms because they indicate not only how many people started watching but also how much time audiences spent engaging with the content. Action films on streaming services compete against countless entertainment options available instantly on the same platform. Maintaining viewer attention for over 2 hours requires strong pacing, emotional engagement, and compelling visual storytelling. The high viewing hour numbers suggest that audiences were not merely sampling the film briefly but actively watching substantial portions of it. This reflects the effectiveness of the movie's pacing, action choreography, and emotional narrative structure. The success of Extraction 2 also demonstrated the power of franchise recognition within streaming entertainment. By the time the sequel was released, audiences already recognized Tyler Rake as a major action protagonist and associated the franchise with high-intensity action sequences. This familiarity created anticipation and audience trust. Viewers who enjoyed the first film returned expecting a similar combination of emotional storytelling and technically impressive action filmmaking. One of the key reasons audiences responded positively to the film was the reputation established by the original Extraction. The first movie had become famous for its immersive long-take action scenes, grounded combat style, and emotionally driven narrative. As a result, many viewers approached Extraction 2 expecting not just action spectacle but a continuation of Tyler Rake's emotional journey. The sequel succeeded largely because it expanded both the emotional depth and the cinematic ambition of the first film. Another important factor influencing reception was the film's action choreography and cinematography. Modern audiences are increasingly sophisticated regarding action filmmaking. Viewers recognize the difference between generic editing-heavy action and carefully choreographed immersive sequences. Extraction 2 distinguished itself by emphasizing practical stunt work, spatial realism, and physically demanding combat scenes. The prison riot sequence in particular became widely discussed among audiences and critics due to its technical complexity and cinematic intensity. The immersive camera work created a feeling of realism rarely achieved in mainstream action cinema. Instead of fragmenting action through rapid cuts, the film allowed viewers to remain visually connected to Tyler's perspective throughout chaotic situations. This approach generated strong audience engagement because viewers felt emotionally and physically immersed within the action. The experience resembled survival rather than detached observation. The film's emotional storytelling also contributed significantly to audience reception. Tyler Rake's character arc involving grief, guilt, redemption, and emotional healing gave the movie emotional weight beyond simple action spectacle. Audiences connected with Tyler because he was portrayed as vulnerable, damaged, and psychologically scarred rather than invincible. His emotional struggles surrounding the death of his son added humanity to the character. The themes of family trauma, toxic masculinity, revenge, and redemption resonated strongly throughout the narrative. Relationships between characters such as Tyler, Mia, Kitevan, Sandro, Nick, and Yaz created emotional stakes that made the violence feel meaningful rather than empty. Streaming audiences often respond positively to emotionally layered storytelling because home viewing environments encourage deeper engagement with character-driven narratives. Unlike theatrical experiences focused heavily on spectacle and crowd reaction, streaming allows viewers to absorb emotional details more intimately. The release of Extraction 2 also reinforced Netflix's growing identity as a producer of large-scale original action franchises. In earlier years, streaming services were often viewed primarily as distributors of television series or smaller films. By 2023, however, Netflix had evolved into a major player capable of financing globally ambitious productions featuring top-tier talent, advanced visual effects, and blockbuster-level production values. Extraction 2 represented this transformation clearly. The film featured international locations, major action set pieces, sophisticated cinematography, and a globally recognized lead actor. Its production scale rivaled many theatrical releases. The success of the film demonstrated that audiences were increasingly willing to embrace streaming-exclusive action blockbusters as legitimate cinematic events rather than secondary alternatives to theatrical releases. Another major aspect of the film's reception involved discussions surrounding the future of the Extraction franchise. The ending of the movie strongly hinted at further expansion through Tyler Rake's recruitment for another mission by Idris Elba's mysterious character. This open-ended conclusion encouraged speculation about future sequels, spin-offs, and broader cinematic universe development. The Russo brothers had already discussed their interest in expanding the Extraction world into interconnected stories involving multiple characters. The strong audience performance of Extraction 2 increased confidence in these franchise ambitions. Successful viewership numbers demonstrated sustained audience investment in the universe and its characters. The film's release also highlighted how streaming platforms collect and present audience data differently from traditional theatrical systems. Instead of focusing on ticket sales, streaming services emphasize metrics like unique viewers and total viewing hours. This creates a different relationship between audiences and films. Success becomes less about one-time transactions and more about long-term engagement within a streaming ecosystem. For Netflix, Extraction 2 likely served multiple strategic purposes beyond viewership alone. High-profile releases help retain subscribers, attract new users, strengthen brand identity, and demonstrate competitive strength within the entertainment industry. Large-scale action films are especially valuable because they possess strong international appeal. Action storytelling often transcends language barriers more effectively than dialogue-heavy dramas or culturally specific comedies. The global nature of Extraction 2 made it ideal for Netflix's international platform. The film featured multinational characters, international settings, and universally understandable themes such as survival, loyalty, revenge, and family protection. Critically, the reception of Extraction 2 also reflected growing appreciation for stunt-driven action filmmaking. In recent years, audiences and critics have increasingly celebrated films emphasizing practical choreography and physical performance over excessive CGI spectacle. Sam Hargrave's background as a stunt coordinator gave the film authenticity and technical precision that action enthusiasts deeply appreciated. The movie's action scenes felt grounded, painful, and physically believable despite their scale. Chris Hemsworth's performance received significant attention as well. Audiences recognized the demanding physicality of the role alongside the emotional vulnerability he brought to Tyler Rake. The film's emotional and technical achievements together helped elevate it above generic streaming action content. Instead of feeling disposable or formulaic, Extraction 2 felt carefully crafted and emotionally invested in its characters. Another important aspect of the film's release was its role in shaping perceptions of Netflix's cinematic ambitions. Streaming platforms have sometimes faced criticism that their original films lack the artistic identity or cultural impact of theatrical cinema. Extraction 2 challenged those assumptions by delivering visually ambitious filmmaking designed for immersive audience engagement. The technical quality of the cinematography, stunt coordination, sound design, and production scale demonstrated that streaming films could achieve blockbuster-level craftsmanship. The release strategy also reflected confidence in global digital distribution. Rather than limiting audiences through staggered theatrical releases, Netflix leveraged instant worldwide accessibility. This approach allowed social media discussion and audience reactions to spread rapidly across countries and cultures. Streaming releases create global conversations almost immediately because millions of viewers can access the content simultaneously. The sustained viewership performance suggested that word of mouth contributed significantly to the film's success. Viewers impressed by the action sequences and emotional storytelling likely recommended the movie to others, extending its popularity beyond the initial release window. Ultimately, the release and reception of Extraction 2 represented a major milestone for both the franchise and streaming blockbuster cinema as a whole. The successful premiere, strong audience engagement, impressive viewing hour statistics, and widespread popularity demonstrated that streaming-exclusive action films could achieve cultural impact comparable to traditional theatrical releases. The film proved that audiences were eager for emotionally grounded, technically sophisticated action storytelling delivered on a global streaming platform. It also confirmed Tyler Rake's status as one of the defining modern action protagonists of the streaming era. Most importantly, the release of Extraction 2 solidified the franchise's future potential. Strong audience response showed that viewers remained deeply invested in the world, characters, and cinematic style established by the series. The critical response to Extraction 2, 2023, reflects the modern complexity of evaluating large-scale streaming action films in an era where audience expectations, cinematic craftsmanship, and platform-driven distribution models all intersect. Unlike traditional theatrical releases, where critical consensus often heavily influences box office performance, streaming films operate in a different ecosystem where viewer engagement, global accessibility, and franchise potential play equally important roles alongside critical opinion. The film's reception demonstrates a clear division between appreciation for its technical achievements, especially its action choreography, cinematography, and stunt execution, and criticism of its narrative structure, pacing choices, and occasional reliance on spectacle over subtle storytelling. This balance between praise and critique is reflected clearly in aggregated review scores, individual critic responses, and broader industry discussions about the evolving identity of action cinema. On the review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, Extraction 2 holds an approval rating of around 80% based on 138 critic reviews, with an average rating of 6.7 out of 10. This indicates that the majority of critics responded positively to the film, even if their enthusiasm was measured rather than overwhelming. In the language of Rotten Tomatoes, this level of approval suggests that most reviewers found the film to be effective, entertaining, and competently made, even if it did not reach the level of universal acclaim. The consensus statement on the platform summarizes this sentiment by describing the film as bigger, bolder, and in some respects even better than its predecessor, an over-the-top action thriller done right. This description captures the central critical interpretation of the film. It succeeds most strongly when it embraces its identity as an intense, large-scale action spectacle while continuing the emotional and stylistic foundations established in the first Extraction film. The idea of being bigger and bolder reflects the sequel's ambition. Critics generally acknowledged that Extraction 2 expands the scale of action, introduces more complex set pieces, and pushes the boundaries of stunt filmmaking further than the original. The prison riot sequence, the train escape, and the Vienna safehouse assault were frequently cited as examples of how the sequel raises the technical and cinematic stakes. However, the phrase, in some respects even better, also implies that the improvement is not absolute. Critics recognized that while the film excels in action design and visual execution, its narrative depth and emotional subtlety remain somewhat limited. This balance between technical excellence and narrative restraint is central to understanding the critical response. In contrast to Rotten Tomatoes' generally positive consensus, Metacritic presents a more tempered evaluation. The film received a weighted average score of 57 out of 100 based on 29 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. This difference highlights an important distinction in critical evaluation systems. Rotten Tomatoes measures the proportion of positive versus negative reviews, while Metacritic attempts to quantify overall quality through weighted scoring. The Metacritic score suggests that while many critics acknowledged the film's strengths, they also had significant reservations about its overall impact as a piece of cinema. These reservations often focused on storytelling depth, character development, and tonal consistency. Together, these two aggregated scores illustrate the dual identity of Extraction 2 as both a highly effective action spectacle and a film that does not fully satisfy critics seeking deeper narrative innovation. Individual critic reviews provide more nuanced insight into these evaluations. Helen O'Hara of Empire awarded the film 4 out of 5 stars, offering one of the more positive critical perspectives. Her review emphasizes the film's successful balancing of overwhelming action with moments of restraint and wit. O'Hara acknowledges that certain extended action sequences risk becoming excessive or overwhelming, but she praises director Sam Hargrave for maintaining control over the pacing and emotional clarity. This observation reflects a common challenge in modern action filmmaking: maintaining audience engagement during long, complex sequences without causing fatigue or visual confusion. Her comment about Hargrave pulling it back suggests that despite the film's intensity, there is a deliberate effort to regulate pacing and emotional rhythm. This control is particularly important in sequences like the prison escape and train battle, where continuous action could easily become disorienting without careful direction. Ahara also notes witty touches throughout the film, highlighting moments of subtle humor and character-driven interaction that provide relief from the intense action. These moments are important because they prevent the film from becoming emotionally one-dimensional. Her reference to the use of a rake as a weapon and a nod to Thor reflects Chris Hemsworth's broader screen persona and the film's occasional self-awareness. These details suggest that while Extraction 2 is primarily grounded in realism and brutality, it still incorporates moments of playful cinematic recognition that acknowledge the actor's larger career. Overall, Empire's review positions the film as a highly effective action thriller that succeeds because of its control, craftsmanship, and understanding of audience expectations. In contrast, the Indian Express offers a more critical perspective, particularly regarding the film's conclusion. The review describes the relatively restrained final showdown as a little anticlimactic. This critique highlights a recurring tension in action cinema between escalation and resolution. After multiple large-scale action sequences, audiences often expect a final confrontation that surpasses earlier set pieces in intensity or emotional impact. In Extraction 2, however, the final sequence focuses more on emotional resolution and character dynamics rather than escalating physical spectacle. For some critics, this shift from high-intensity action to a more restrained emotional climax may feel unsatisfying. However, from a narrative perspective, it reflects the film's emphasis on character development and emotional closure rather than constant escalation. This divergence in expectations illustrates a broader debate within action filmmaking, whether the climax of a film should prioritize spectacle or emotional resolution. Extraction 2 attempts to balance both, but not all critics found this balance entirely successful. Matt Donato of IGN provides a more mixed assessment, acknowledging both strengths and weaknesses. He notes that some of the film's emotional and thematic depth is diminished by annoyingly shaky camera work and questionable effects shots. This critique reflects ongoing debates about the use of handheld or kinetic camera movement in action cinema. While immersive camera work can increase realism and intensity, excessive shakiness or visual instability can sometimes reduce clarity and viewer comfort. Donato's reference to effect shot suggests that while the film relies heavily on practical stunt work, certain digital enhancements or composite elements may not always integrate seamlessly. This highlights the challenges of blending practical and digital techniques in modern action filmmaking. Despite these criticisms, Donato ultimately acknowledges that the important things are done right. This indicates that the core strengths of the film, its action choreography, pacing, and emotional stakes, remain effective even if certain technical aspects are imperfect. Gopinath Rajendran of The Hindu offers a more enthusiastic perspective, particularly focusing on the film's action set pieces. He notes that while the film may have shortcomings in certain areas, its action sequences largely compensate for them. A key point in his review is the comparison between the first and second films in terms of long-take action sequences. The original Extraction featured a famous extended sequence lasting around 12 minutes, which became a defining moment for the franchise. In Extraction 2, the sequel expands this approach with a 21-minute continuous-style action sequence. This increase in scale reflects the filmmaker's ambition to push the boundaries of stunt coordination and immersive filmmaking even further. Rajendran's review emphasizes that these extended sequences are not merely technical exercises but defining features of the franchise. They contribute significantly to audience excitement and critical recognition, even when other aspects of the film are seen as less innovative. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian, however, offers one of the most negative assessments, awarding the film 1 out of 5 stars. His critique describes the film as cynically about extracting the cash, suggesting that the sequel prioritizes commercial motivation over artistic integrity. This perspective reflects a more skeptical view of franchise filmmaking in general. Bradshaw's criticism implies that the film may be perceived as formulaic or financially driven rather than creatively necessary. Such critiques are common in discussions of large-scale sequels, particularly those tied to successful streaming properties. When a film becomes part of a franchise, it often faces scrutiny regarding whether it exists for storytelling purposes or commercial expansion. Bradshaw's negative review highlights the ongoing tension between artistic evaluation and franchise economics in modern cinema. Despite mixed critical responses, Extraction 2 received recognition for its stunt work, including a nomination for Best Stunts at the 6th Hollywood Critics Association Midseason Film Awards. This nomination underscores one of the film's most widely acknowledged strengths, its technical achievement in action design and execution. Stunt recognition is particularly important for a film like Extraction 2 because its identity is heavily built around physical performance, choreography, and practical filmmaking. The nomination reflects industry appreciation for the complexity and ambition of its action sequences. Beyond individual reviews and awards, the critical response to Extraction 2 also reveals broader trends in how action films are evaluated today. Critics increasingly assess such films on multiple levels: technical execution, emotional depth, narrative coherence, and innovation within the genre. In this context, Extraction 2 is often praised for its technical mastery but critiqued for its relatively straightforward storytelling. It succeeds most strongly as a visceral cinematic experience rather than a deeply complex narrative work. This duality is not necessarily a weakness but rather a reflection of the film's clear priorities. The filmmakers focused heavily on immersive action, emotional intensity, and franchise continuity rather than narrative experimentation. The sequel also benefits from its strong understanding of audience expectations. Viewers of the Extraction franchise typically seek high-intensity action sequences, grounded combat realism, and emotionally driven character arcs. On these fronts, the film largely delivers. At the same time, critics who prioritize narrative innovation or thematic depth may find the film less compelling compared to other contemporary action dramas that emphasize psychological complexity or stylistic experimentation. Ultimately, the critical response to Extraction 2 can be understood as a spectrum rather than a single unified judgment. At one end are reviewers who celebrate its technical brilliance, immersive action, and franchise evolution. At the other are critics who view it as overly reliant on spectacle or lacking in narrative ambition. Between these perspectives lies a broad consensus that the film is a highly competent, visually impressive action thriller that succeeds in delivering intense entertainment, even if it does not fully transcend genre conventions. In the context of modern streaming cinema, this level of reception is significant. Extraction 2 demonstrates that action films can achieve both popular success and critical recognition for technical achievement, even when narrative